All right. Looks like I'm live. Straighten my hat. All right. Welcome. Anybody who might be on. Well, all right. Very short notice on this one. I'm just trying to get these things done when there's a window of opportunity. Hang on really quick here. All right. All right. So I already posted it to Twitter, so that should be good. I'm trying to think of how to begin this because I wanted to expand on a topic from yesterday. And like my brother, I basically made a discovery about, the whole connection with the NSD. Um, you know, I kind of want to like have a few more people on, I think, when I talk about this part, but I just want to make sure that I cover this topic in detail tonight. Because I've been talking a lot about, the family, people who've had jobs in other roles historically at the Department of Justice, like my Aunt Catherine Warma. So I just want to make sure people all have a very clear understanding of the data sets that are going on here. Okay, like my Aunt Catherine Warma has not been at the Seattle Department of Justice since I think about it's like 2012, maybe 2013 is when she retired, if I'm not mistaken. And then, and I've never said otherwise. Okay, just so you guys know, I'm just making sure that in case people have any misperceptions about that, that's clear. And that the other point that I wanted to clarify on now that I'm aware, because I wasn't before, mainly because, guys, one of the only ways I really find out about things going on with my brother's career, if I'm not, directly looking into it at the moment. Like I was even surprised when I found out that he worked at the National Security Directorate to begin with. And so I guess I've just had in my head that he stayed at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, Hanford. Sorry for those of you unfamiliar with my material. You'll probably have to have seen the last couple streams to understand this. So I discovered quite in the middle of the live stream, quite coincidentally, last night that my brother, Joaquin Joe Cruz, is not at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory any longer. But I'm going to explain why the connection and having been there as long as he had is still relevant, because it's a little bit like, and again, guys, this isn't sort of any like explaining it away. It's going to be to explain to you based on what I've seen within these. If what I showed you before, the opening slide, the freeze slide that I show you, which I'll show you here on the screen here in a second. Actually, let me just do that, because this is what I should basically begin with here before I get into anything else. I'll get into the whole Cornerstone thing soon, because I did a Twitter on that and I wanted to expand on the topic because, again, guys, it's not because I really want to go into any sort of dark topic like that or anything else like that. It's mostly just because a lot of times the problem is because of the material that I cover and some of the things that I have to research. Whether it's look, there's a lot of cognitive dissonance that can occur when approaching certain information, especially by myself. Like I approach certain things, and when I discover that something else is true, that when I expected another thing to be true, like I don't know, it messes with me. And at least it used to quite a bit more. Now I kind of just expect it, and so I don't get that bothered. But anyways, guys, the reason why I got surprised is because nearly every time I've done a web search on any IP address that I've been associated with, the organization chart at my brother's company was the one that you see on the right, minus the thing of Gage Grotzkreutz and that whole thing on the bottom there. But you'll see here that my brother, he's this Joe Cruz. He was in this group at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory called the National Security Directorate. And again, that's PNNL, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, right? And so this is the org chart that I've basically had saved on my hard drive for, I don't know, like over a year or so, and assumed was relatively accurate still. But I was a little bit surprised yesterday in the live stream that when I ran a search from this particular location, I found not a completely different record, but a record in opposition of the other one. But again, it's still eyebrow raising if you followed my research and you're kind of familiar with the way oftentimes record corruptions occur. So to be clear, you'll notice here, like my brother Joe Cruz was the operations guy there, and then it turned into Shelley Groats. And what's really weird is when I looked up Shelley Groats, I found a record that said that she was partially, or she or he, I don't know if Shelley's a he or she, was I think partially retired. So I don't know what it means that they're running the operations group out there, if they're both listed as being there running it and also saying that they're partially retired. I'm not sure what that means. Um, but the reason why I thought it was a little bit curious that like this whole time I wasn't aware that my brother had left PNNL. Like he not only isn't at National Security Directorate, I mean, he left PNNL entirely and he had been there for a number of years, like a long time. I mean, not super long, but quite a long time, several years, I think. And and the problem is, guys, like I've had his LinkedIn profile and things like that to reference, but not like a recent record of it. Like most of the things that I had saved was from when I had access to LinkedIn. And for some strange reason, like when I talk to other people, they're able to go to LinkedIn without having a profile. I don't know what's unique about me, but others seem like their experience when they're on LinkedIn is that they can still review people's profiles and nothing like excessively blocks them from doing that, and they're not required to be logged in necessarily or have a profile on LinkedIn. What I run into typically is I may be allowed to see one profile once, perhaps, that clicks into LinkedIn. But after that, unless I do extensive, like, web browser clearing out and everything else like that kind of activities, or, switching like routes on a VPN or something like that. And even then, it's not effective. I will get repetitive results of an equal nature on LinkedIn, which is to say that like it will refuse to display it and it'll blur out the entire profile so I can't see where the person works or even what their photo is. So I was very surprised to find my brother's LinkedIn profile last night and to discover that, yeah, he did in fact leave this position at National Security Directorate. Under what conditions, I have no idea, and that occurred last year in 2020. So to be clear, guys, yeah, I mean, he did have this association. He was in this powerful of a position, but again, let's be clear, was. So going forward, please understand that this is a past tense position which he had, but it was not that long ago that he was there. And I still find it concerning, even with his new role, for a lot of reasons. I think that it doesn't really change anything that I've said. It just makes it more easy to say that I make things up or that I might be creating correlations of data that aren't appropriate or something else to that nature. So that nobody can do that, I want to make sure that you guys kind of see what I see. And again, this doesn't mean that this equals that. It doesn't mean that I'm right or wrong, but you should know that groups like the National Security Directorate have, through something called the National Directorate, no, sorry, the National Defense Authorization Act. They have, through this NDA, which is a part of the Smith-Mundt Act, that it gave the Department of Energy, as well as a few other groups like the State Department, and like I think before it was strictly a State Department thing that could do this, but it also gave Department of Energy authorizations to create propaganda that would be distributed not only in foreign audiences, but to United States based audiences, American audiences as well, which is to say you basically have the whole architecture for a bill or an act within governance that allows this group within Department of Energy the ability to perform what we would call LARPs, which are live action role plays, which can transition into what some might call false flags. Let's just be real here, folks. And if you understand that what has been going on since my material is that a lot of people would be trying to separate themselves from obvious associations to groups that would link them to everything that I've discussed to you. My brother's transition from being in this pretty major role at the PNNL to being at another organization doing something far less significant, well, maybe not less significant, but where he wasn't in control of a staff that was directly controlled to government like this is. Like, this is something pretty seriously embedded within infrastructure relative to the control and flow and surveillance of information, where, yeah, he pretty much had some pretty serious accesses there up until spring of 2020 or so. Um, and again, so the reason why I kind of call BS on this being maybe just a puppet transition and something that they did just for surface, like to look, it doesn't mean that I'm right, and it doesn't mean that I'm 100% sold on this idea, okay? Because I don't have any proof that this is what they're doing. But let me ask you, what would you think? Okay, guys, this is bizarre to me. What would you think if you saw this, that your brother left and they put in a person named Shelley Groats? Now, guys, again, I'm not trying to like be whatever. It's just that my brother was married to a woman named Groat. They're divorced now, but you know, he and his sister, or she and her sister, would be the Groats when you pluralize it. And so when I see Shelley Groats took over for Joe Cruz, I go, who really is Shelley Groats? And then I look up Shelley Groats's LinkedIn profile, and it says basically that she's been at PNNL pretty much for 30 years. One place in various different positions, just bouncing around Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Has Shelley always been a real person, or is she a shell and a lie that I'm sure they could roll out an actor to play or become and be in the position if need be, because that's how the system would work. So that if a person like me ever goes, you guys, they make a lot of these things up. They go, oh, no, here they are. Here they are. Just like SAIC, here's where it gets obscene, you guys. Just the same way SAIC can approach you in earnest and say, what? Nazi King, she's our CEO. Why is that weird, Gabe? You don't believe that somebody could be named Nazi King? Guys, really? A woman named Nazi King runs SAIC, Science Applications International Corporation. I mean, Nazi sounds like Nazi King. Guys, the Germans are fond of calling kings Kaisers. Whoa. Now we're getting deep. Because Kaiser, if you followed my research, is central to everything. Like, they're always using Kaiser, Kaiser, Kaiser. Even the film, The Usual Suspects, having a character named Kaiser Soze is a part of the whole larger thing involving Hollywood, uranium, who's really in power, how they hide their real selves behind a lore and a story that scares the living shit out of everybody, is hyper realistic to you, and they'll make realistic to you. This has been my challenge, guys. I have this. I need people that especially if you're somebody that I care about and love, all of you, please understand that this level of like obvious fakery has been around me for a long time. And that it wasn't until just like about the last 5 years or so that I started to go and I initially started looking into it, and I was kind of like going, wow, what a coincidence, or wow, that's just kind of like a pun. And oh, no, that one's not funny. Oh, that's dark. Ooh, no, they're what? Oh, like every time I would run across something new, my mind did not want to believe it. I wasn't sitting here immediately going like, got him. I knew they're like this. Oh no. Mm-mm. No, 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 no. Understand that. I really am historically, I definitely have a pessimistic aspect to me, but by and large, especially since having listened to Robert Anton Wilson for the last several years, it's convinced me that being an incorrigible optimist is the only way. It's to continue just to have hope that you can make things better or that things will change for the better, but you have to do something, right? There has to be things. You have to speak the words, say the things, make the actions, do what's necessary to push things along to where they need to be. And the system of fakery is extremely powerful. People are very afraid to step away from it. And a lot of times they look to me like, dude, you seem like the bridge, but are you really? And in a way, I am, but it's not going to be an obvious thing. You see, the way this bridge gets built is a lot like the way ants build bridges across like a gap of like several inches with their bodies. That's done a little bit with faith. Mine is needed as well. And to a degree, you know, we do program people. I know, I get it, guys. You're going to be like, it's the one thing that I know people will call me a hypocrite for. And you know something, they may have a point. I fail, a lot of times to, it's because I fail to find the optimistic side of it many times because things like this keep slapping me in the face. And it's relentless and it won't stop. And I don't want to let it win. And so I'm not trying to like remove the humor and the love from my life. And I don't want to lose hope. And I don't want to lose the sense that like I can just keep going and get along with things and not have to worry about it. But it's like if I don't expose this, nobody's going to. You guys understand that like you have to know these people. You pretty much have to be me to even, and then you have to be willing to say it. And then you have to be able to piece it together because no one else is going to look into this. No one else is going to go. I know, guys, but if you're only watching this one thing, you're going to roll your eyes because you didn't see the last two presentations, and it just requires so much attention and focus by most people. They just kind of go, I'm not going to listen to that. I understand. I get it. It's not for everybody when it comes to like absorbing the information. But remember, I told you, like, we're dealing with a group here with the National Security Directorate, not to step away from anything, but like when I started doing my reports, it started revealing this quite pointedly and showing people there was an ecosystem of where it would lead back to. And so, then once you start connecting our family to the actors and the other types of things that were going on, and these false narratives that are designed to create race riots and get people arguing in the streets, you know and that some of the people that are capable of performing these things and would have the staff and would keep the secrets are all there. I mean, the factors are all there. The people that would make it a reality, they're there. They're in front of you. And the language, the code, the names, like everything. And a lot of times when people are confronted, they don't have necessarily even deny it. They just kind of give you that look like you shouldn't be looking into this and you should just walk away. But the whole thing with this trial, guys, was it was designed to not give any group any satisfaction and to get everybody arguing over lies. And I need you to understand that that's something that they try to achieve constantly at an occult level with this group, is to get you angry over a deception and a lie and to argue over it. And they make it hyper realistic. And again, to remind you, this is one of the reasons why I try not to give them that kind of power. And I fail sometimes because I'm constantly having this surrounding me. The architects of this have surrounded me for years. And it wasn't until maybe like the last couple years is when I finally just said, like, I think it was about 2 years ago that I really decided that 3 central people in my life that I had known since birth were definitely completely full of shit and were not the people that I thought they were. And that left me with very little family after that I could really lean on. And then it's been 2 years pretty much since I completely walked away from my parents, and I haven't spoken to them since. And my brother, I think, has tried to make brotherly surface level attempts to keep appearances up as if we kind of maybe get along, or that he's trying to be an understanding brother from a distance, despite the fact that I'm some kind of whatever. But no, he doesn't talk to me, and there wouldn't really be much of an interest in doing it. Really, what I get are scolding emails telling me that I shouldn't be talking about the things that I do the way that I do, or defending groups like SAIC that have, you know, things like this going on. Gabe, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm your older brother. I'm going to try to reinforce this in your mind. I have influence over you, don't I? No, actually, not really. And so the problem is now they've learned increasingly that just having someone like my brother, like I got to tell you guys, like if it was 2012 and my brother called me up and said something like that, I probably would have been like a bobblehead and said like one like, yeah, I know we haven't got along very well, but maybe he's got a point. I should probably just like drop it, and I'm probably shaming. Yeah, I feel bad now. Yeah, I shouldn't have done that. Yeah, I'm really sorry. No, I would have backed down. I probably would have backed down. The influence of like that, or just telling me that I would be shamed, or that I would be, disappointed in somebody in the family, would alone have prevented me from saying what needed to be said. Um, so I need to show you some of the things that I discovered now that I know he's not at that position. So I guess I have to get into the whole Leon Oskin thing for this to make sense. How else do I say it, guys? As far as I can tell, there seems to be some degree of genetic connection that has been hidden relative to the actor Leon Oskin. Leon Oskin is he played General Burkhalter on Hogan's Heroes. Excuse me, I just spelled his name ciphered. Sorry, Leon Oskin from Hogan's Heroes. Okay. And so, knowing that like that was part of the whole ecosystem within one side of my family that is involved in Hollywood, but keeps it a secret through these types of things, right? You're in defense projects, you're doing secret projects, or you're doing things relative to national security where it may require, I guess, that like back in the World War II era, they were trying to keep they have to distribute to a larger audience things relative to like nuclear projects and war plans. And yeah, I mean, you have things where you can communicate certain things in controlled environments within the military, but there was times where they needed to be able to say things way quicker within a television series. Well, that wasn't the World War II, but thinking more in terms of like radio shows, like that was one way that you could get like a nationally broadcast radio show where again, you're playing music, or you're doing something that like most, like 99.9% of the audience is going to see it as with straightforward entertainment. But the people that broadcast that are aware that within that whole broadcast of the radio show, or maybe it's a radio drama, or like they do like the plays that they used to do where, like it's a murder mystery or something like that, or a comedy or something like that. And within the script of that radio play, there would be encoded language that would be broadcast for soldiers, or would be broadcast for the leadership within the military, so that they would immediately get it by watching the serialized or listening to the serialized radio show. That transitioned over into television as these defense projects evolved over time. That transitioned into television series as everything went into time. Now, when you go back and look at the humor of these shows, you can see the evidence of it. You can kind of like know that, like, man, some of this humor just really doesn't make sense straightforward. Even watching things now, you're kind of going like scratching your head sometimes. I get it, guys. Maybe I'm just getting old and I don't understand the hip humor now. Dirt, I don't understand you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm not that old. But maybe I just don't get it, right? You know, hey, welcome there. Appreciate you joining. Um, yeah. So here's the thing, guys. The Hollywood connection, though, there's like my mother's side and there's my father's side, and nobody within these two groups ever told me that this existed. Okay. And it was just something that I had to discover, and I have yet to get anybody to tell me directly yay or nay on how accurate my information is. And I don't think I'm not going to hold my breath waiting for that. I really wouldn't expect anybody to say, yes, I did in fact star in that movie or did that role or whatever, no matter how obvious it is to me, guys. I've seen some of the people that are relatives of mine in these movies. I wasn't imagining it, especially if you see like, dude, if you see your own mother connected in something like that, and her name is Diane, and your father's name is Rudy, and you see the producer is named Rudine, which isn't even a name. I mean, I guess it is. They do things like this all the time. And so I know they'll pair their two names with this other person that'll integrate something that'll be like Francois or Frenchy or again, it's always like that. Mixing these three names into the ciphered name that's the puppet character. And I've seen it over and over again. So it's like I was staying with them for like a year and I was discovering these things, and the way I came about discovering this information, I think, was pretty esoteric in nature. It was like the way that I was able to arrive and get and learn about things relative to their Hollywood careers was pretty unreal and amazing. Um, I do think there's something kind of bizarrely esoteric going on where they're living in Oregon. And they're doing some frequency manipulation things within energetics up there. And I think that some of my research was effectively, it's almost like if I spent time in the environment, even if I didn't understand it directly, I could just immediately just sort of like, they're doing this. And then I would just draw it on a piece of paper, like, okay, they're doing something with these frequencies that are doing that's like part of Project Rainbow. Like one day this happened. I was just sitting there in the garage and I was like, I know what they're doing. And I started drawing it all down on paper. And I just like went, I put all the frequency numbers. It was all just flowing out of my mind. I was just like going, I still have the drawing. Okay. I've never lost it. And let me tell you about that day. I got tracked, followed, and harassed by the local fire department like you would not effing believe. Everywhere I went in town, they mirrored me. And I was not imagining this. I'm not making this up. Every step I took, they were side by side mirroring me. I tried to go everywhere in town. Eventually, I needed gas, right? So I just went to the gas station. They wound up parking nearby, waiting for me to fill up the gas. And then I kept on driving. Now, all I was trying to do when I was leaving the house was be in an environment away from the house to ensure that this discovery I had that I jotted down on paper about all these frequencies and what they were doing to, like, it was basically um, uh, discussing how the Schumann resonance operates and has echoes and reflections, and that it's like it creates a rainbow effect. And I was just trying to tell people that, yeah, you have the base frequency of 7.83, and then each harmonic keeps going up these different steps like a ring because of the curvature of Earth. Then you get a ring in it. And so when you look at a rainbow, it's actually a color spectrum visual representation of the bands of the Schumann resonance that you're getting to see temporarily when the right, atmospheric conditions bind together there. And that's all the thing was. But because I was talking about it in a sense where it kind of helped people understand frequency manipulation better and mind control type things better, it just freaked these people the hell out. And they made it nearly impossible for me to get away from the house and upload the clip. It was really bizarrely nearly terroristic in nature the way they went about doing it. I don't know what else to tell you. They were smirking and smiling and the whole time doing it like they were giddy and could get away with anything. And it doesn't help that my mother told me to my face when we arrived there. She said, Gabe, if I need anything, all I have to do is go down to the fire department and ring their doorbell and they'll get me anything I want. You said that to me, Diane. You really did. You did. And again, I don't want to sound like I'm exaggerating or something like that. She could have meant that in all kinds of ways, like, well, they're just super helpful. But my gut tells me she meant it in a way that was like, no, that's kind of like her private army, quite frankly. And there's lots of evidence to support that if somebody were to really dig deeper into that, because you'll probably observe that she's surrounded by pretty much nothing but those volunteer firemen all around her house. almost like it's another one of those neighborhoods where people can just kind of slip into a character name and own the house under an alias. Hmm. Might want to look into that. Bird's nest. Anyways. um. So the reason why I'm highlighting this data set is because even though I made this I guess you could say the error as far as not updating the records, like every time I did a live stream. I guess if I do a live stream, I should always make sure I know exactly when, he may or may not have terminated employment with PNNL. So touche on that one. But in all fairness to myself, you guys, what I'm trying to explain to you is that when I do try to verify these things, like a lot of times when I find something that I know gives me a lot of information that lines things up perfectly, it somehow miraculously gets deleted from my hard drive or disappears from the internet. Or if it does disappear from the internet, it's suddenly swapped with something that I know is different from what I originally found. So that's why I save both of these. They are the same department. They're the same, org chart of the same group of people. You can see additions and subtractions from one to the other, or swapping of roles from one place to the other on these charts. So I guess I could put that up someplace for others to review if you wanted to, and you could do your own research, I suppose. But I don't know. I think that this department probably has a lot more reach as far as what they're able to plan and implement within the United States than it would appear by simply looking at the group. Especially when they have an operations team that is like over like a thousand to 1,100 people out there. As far as I can tell, like parts of Hanford are like a mini Hollywood, where they do actually do filmmaking and filmmaking projects, but the films are actually a lot like the way they used to be. They are kind of there for people with eyes to see and ears to hear about projects relative to what they're doing that you could not normally communicate. See, they've gone back to the old system, guys. Does that make sense? Do you know why they would go back to the old system, knowing how traceable nearly every IP route and every email is, how easy it is to pretty much hack everything? So the modern form of encryption and communication is out in the open, I promise you. And I apologize to the people that have implemented this system in ways that are there to protect America and not there to harm it. But I do believe you are outnumbered by the ones harming it. So get some new code. That's the best thing I can tell you. Learn a new way to communicate, find a new system that's different than what they do, even if you only have to make slight variations to it. Find a different code. It's hard to explain, guys. It's a little bit like this whole thing here is all I'm trying to explain to you. Like, however you go about doing record corruptions and hiding things, this doesn't really hide it. It makes it pretty obvious to those of us who kind of know what's going on. Like my brother, if he divorced the Groatses, and you're telling me that he left the position and now it's run by the Groats, Shelley Groats. So he got divorced from his job and the Groatses took over. I don't know. Is that what that means? I don't know. It just looks, I mean, that person's been there 30 years. Does anybody stay in any role for 30, like in any company for 30 years anymore? Like I stayed at one for almost 20, and I promise you that was real. I actually was there the whole time. I started in 1994 and my career ended. Well, I guess I was pretty close to 18 years in that job. But yeah, in telecommunications, that's nearly unheard of. That's one of the reasons why some of us stayed there, is just because we knew that it's like you could not get that kind of security and employment, even if they paid a lot less. The company that we were at, we just knew we had a lot of job security and we all liked working with one another for the most part. And that's what kept us there, doing it for that reason. It was just the culture, the people. It was mostly because we were the culture, there's the people. We kind of made it what it was, and we all liked each other. And that right there, I mean, really, it does. It makes a big difference on what'll motivate you to get up every day and go spend 8 hours of your or more per day with everybody. A lot more time than you spend with your family sometimes. So, anyways, I wanted to raise this to your attention to say that yes, he's gone from that role, but is he? That's a question I think that's worth asking for anybody who knows how it works. Did he just go to a shell company? Did you go to a shell company? I'm just asking. I'm just asking. Oh wait, I'm just asking or Atkins. No, he went to Atkins. Sorry, that's right. Like there's Leon Oskin. So Leon Oskin. No, that was okay. So Atkins is where he's at. Atkins Nuclear. I don't know. To me, again, I could be wrong, and maybe these things have no correlation or anything else like that. But if you kind of know what all that is right there, then what I'm doing down here will make a little bit more sense. Like if he goes to Atkins Nuclear and Atkin, it doesn't mean one thing leads to another or that these things have a correlation. But yeah, again, guys, and again, I think it's almost like designed to bait me a little bit into talking about the Leon Oskin thing, because where do I get the records to say one person is another? You see, to get the records to prove all the things that I'm telling you that I'm pretty convinced now are true, um, I have to ask the very people rigging it. They control the records. Are they going to admit it? I mean, do you believe that if Nazi King, sorry, Nazi King, that's our name, Nazi King, which sounds like Nazi King. Nazi King sounds like Nazi King, right? Just like Leon Oskin of Hogan's Heroes, Oskin, Atkins. And isn't it funny that the only difference between Oskin and Atkin is you take the T and the S and swap them. Other than that, they're the same word. Wait a second. TS, like tase. Just like Albert S. Ruddy formed the word taser in the middle, right? Remember I showed you yesterday, those who were joining? Albert S. Ruddy, type it out. Albert S. Albert S. Ruddy, the producer of Godfather. Again, guys, cryptograms and ciphers. Don't tell me they don't exist, and don't tell me I don't know how the mind of my own family works. Please give me a little credit. All right, guys. I shared a bunk bed with this man pretty much until I was 15 years old. I know how his mind works. Guys, Earth resonance alone must tell you I know how his mind works. Can we agree? He was in the bottom bunk, I was in the top bunk. Let's take a look at what happened there with relative from bioplasma fields and frequency. You see, every night the Schumann resonance passed through my brother's body, and en route it passed through mine. Think that shit about it. I mean, seriously, I want you to really think about what I just told you. I'm going to illustrate it. This is the perfect time to just bust out my spare camera here. All right, hang on. This is worth discussing, actually, because this is actually a pretty, there we go. Got to get my camera going. Hey now. All right. Okay, so the Schumann resonance is there on the Earth, right? 7.83 hertz or cycles per second. All right. And then there's these harmonics that go outbound. I'll talk about that later, okay? But let's just say that, like, you're in a house on a hill. No, like, we'll just say this is the round Earth, right? And then here's a hilltop, and then your house is like, this is the way our house was. How do I say it? It was like partially in the dirt in the hill. So it kind of went like that. And so then the hill kind of went like this, so the house was in there like that. And so, but it was kind of at the crest of the hill, and then he went down like that. Sorry. Hey, you like my dimensional drawing there? Kind of all right. All right. Anyways, you know what? I did that. I was way too detailed on that. I look stupid, but the point is, guys, is that yeah. So the house was in the dirt. Let me make it like this, and then you got to think about, we were in bunk beds, right? So here we are in the basement level. We slept on the basement level, and you got these two bunk beds like this, right? And then here's me, and here's my brother. And then the Schumann resonance is passing here. And I would argue what happened is, like, the influence layers. I think if you really know how my family's mind kind of works, this was designed, Gabe's up here on the top bunk, Joaquin's down here on the bottom bunk, and you got the frequency kind of going here. It's like it's designed to pass through him before it goes on to me. It occurred to me also that you could probably do some genetic manipulation this way. You could make people's genes bind more readily, and they would probably take on physical characteristics that would be more alike one another. It'd almost be like a bioenergetic form of CRISPR technology. And before you roll your eyes at that, I want you to really consider this seriously. And remember that pretty much everything going on at the Department of Energy has a hell of a lot more to do with genetics and bioengineering and the Human Genome Project. I mean, it's way more about that now than it's about all the other things with nuclear. I mean, I'd say nuclear and bioenerget, or not bioenergetics, but what do you want to call it? Like biomed type things, anything to do with, like, what you can learn to alter genes, modify genes, for the sake of, quote, improving genes, things of that nature. All right, hang on, let me get that out of the screen. Nope, no, not that. How about that? There we go. Okay, so I'm just saying, like, if you think about what was going on here when we were inside the beds, let me just, like, make that a little bit larger, right? So here we are in bunk beds. And what I'm telling you is, it's like a little bit like like, as the frequency goes upward, right? Like this, think about these as waves of the Schumann resonance and passes through us. It's going to, like, get attenuated a bit. Well, maybe not actually, because no, ELF passes through everything. So there would be no attenuation factor, actually. It would just pass through all the earth layers in both people. But it seems to me like the stacking of one person above or below the other every single night for years and years, and it being like this, that when you think about brainwave to brainwave, then what you begin doing is clocking cycles. So that, say I'm at, like, I don't know, say I'm at like 8 hertz when I'm like right here. And maybe the impact that this would have over time is that whatever brain state that my brother's in would create, a variance between the Schumann resonance and my brother's. And so I would get equal influence relative to my sleep cycle between the earth resonance and my own brother. And if you think about this, guys, about what they're doing, everything that they do, every single thing that they do is about gaining influence via DNA and bioengineering. Everything. CRISPR technology, breeding programs, all of it is about what can they do just by simply, altering babies, having more babies, doing things, whatever like that, right? I mean, it just is. It is their secret economy beyond nuclear. Okay. All right. I'll do more of the whiteboarding, but um Didn't mean to get that esoteric with that part because I want you guys to just kind of know I'm trying to correct that. I've gone 44 minutes into this and I haven't even done the whole thing on the other topic. But you know what? I guess what I just did is kind of a good bridge if you think about it into what I'm about to talk about because it deals in nearly the same concept within occult sacrifice, cornerstones, and the whole technology of it, and why it's been practiced, I guess you could say, for centuries. Now, I'm not a person that's trying to make a case for its being done. I don't necessarily even think that I don't necessarily even believe that it works. I think that what makes an idea work is the belief in the idea. And I think it's important to dismantle that idea, oftentimes, the belief in the idea, through the revelation of the science of what's being manipulated at a perception level so that the conscious mind can take over from the passive mind that just simply accepts information at face value and just goes, well, that's true. I guess I'm surrounded by the same storyline, so I know it must be true. I mean, it's honestly what I would say though is if it seems like that's the better place to be, um, I understand why, and I'm not necessarily critical of it. I think if you're already there, then it may, I think for most people, like for the sake of their sanity, maybe it's better that they stay in that state of mind and they don't try to wake up right away like a lot of people have, or they don't try to rush themselves into learning about the things any more than they have. So I'm not necessarily in like, this huge whatever to get everybody to understand it, because what I'm talking about, it does require above average level of sophistication to get and grasp, and you would have to do a lot of independent research from what I say, and be taking a lot of notes or taking the cues or the visuals from like the things that I do in here. I mean, you would have to like be following the links, researching the links on your own independently and coming up with your own conclusions too. That would be the only way that these things would make sense. I mean, to that point, even it's kind of surprised me that nobody's ever brought up to me like, well, did you know that your brother transitioned from PNNL to Atkins? I mean, I've never had anybody correct me on that point, and I've had people watching this for a year. I'm not scolding anybody on that, by the way. I mean, not at all. But I just didn't know, guys. I really just didn't know. And you learn something like that, you figure, well, this person's probably going to be running the operations department of there for a long time. Hell, I had no idea that they had all parted ways. So, but then when I look at that org chart, when I get back to that whole thing with, what were we on there? Yeah, this. When we get back to this whole thing, I don't know. Am I really? I mean, did he really go? Did somebody who might be connected to Leon Oskin really go to Atkin Nuclear, or is that just consistent with the system? I mean, I understand there's a company named that, and they've been around a long time. I mean, I never heard of them. I guess they're more popular in Europe or something like that. But um, yeah, they're in the United States. They've got not that many offices, but they are pretty much in places where my brother has spent time historically. So I know that when he was at Hanford, he oftentimes spend time not just at Hanford, but also over at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. And I remember him telling me that he had some things that would take him to North Carolina periodically, but I don't remember what those things were because I didn't ever remember there being any nuclear projects or labs in North Carolina of any relative significance. But I did remember that he went to Oak Ridge, Tennessee very, very frequently for things, and he had other things that brought him over to the East Coast for those reasons. And that's the only reason why I think sometimes, guys, I have to sort of like, find that happy balance between just sort of giving people time to figure things out on their own. And I may not always be right on every data correlation, and I leave room open for that. In fact, to be honest with you guys, honestly, in most cases, I really kind of hope, especially when it's a negative thing, I really hope that the data set will be proven wrong. I'm not the kind of person that's gleefully running around looking for things wrong with people or hoping that I'll find it. I honestly don't. Usually when I find things like this, I kind of just go like, or man, really? Seriously? You're going to do it like that? I mean, it's usually those are my things. Every now and then, yeah, I'm not gonna lie to you. I go, I got you. Yeah, yeah. Sometimes I feel that way, but not that frequently. Usually I just feel let down or disappointed. Like, I don't want to feel like this. I don't really want to know this about these people. So I get it. But it's difficult oftentimes to turn a blind eye to sometimes things that are pretty, obvious. And, so I know that my information sometimes gets gaslit. And so I've done things about like ritual sacrifice relative to bioenergetics, and I want to revisit that material tonight. Okay. So I'm going to step away from this topic involving the National Security Directorate and my brother's career probably in a little bit. And I'm going to get deeper into the next topic. But it is relative to this because things that are nuclear do seem to have a link to things that involve human DNA and perhaps substrate material that is connected to certain devices that are also within the nuclear industry that would involve human materials as a method to kill people by binding and attaching nuclear materials to DNA in order to deconstruct DNA and creating, bombs or devices or things that are more remote DNA manipulating in nature, to sort of just dismantle people or vibrate them out of existence in essence. Scalar weaponry, things that are very, very esoteric that a lot of people it would be easy to mask them as like weather projects or to say that they're just doing some things out of the lab for the sake of this or that. But no, it's become increasingly easier for people to develop energy weapons that can use things like ionospheric bounce, for example, to remotely hit people at a distance with energy weapons. And so, what I'm concerned about is that there's probably like kind of like a civil, like a quiet, silent civil war going on with energy weapons, where people that are at the Department of Energy have they're making their own decisions to use them without any sort of like authorization from any military or any sort of like oversight group. And it's extremely easy for them to get away with because if you complain to the military, they're going to be looking at you like, well, we ain't doing this. What, you think the Marines are running around doing this to you? You think it's a bunch of people at the Army doing this to you? I mean, really? You think we don't have better things to do? In a way, they're right. I mean, I would expect them to have better things to do. So that's why I've kind of rejected those arguments typically. It's like, guys, I think if you think it's, quote, the military, I mean, sure, there's got to be some military personnel involved here and there. And perhaps, that participate in these types of things, of course, because they have the most experience with directed energy weapons. Yeah, things like that. Okay. Um, but, the point is, when it comes to this thing with the nuclear industry, I don't think that the influence a person has from one group to the other is lost, is the best thing I can tell you. I think that what they do is they establish a base of operations, they place shell characters behind that'll run things on their behalf, and they just keep going from place to place to place, leaving their influence and a character actor or somebody who may be competent but is still just there to basically make decisions on their behalf is left behind. And they just keep collecting the government money, and the people just get placed in and out of these various locations as puppets. And they'll achieve quite a bit of success because that's what they're designed to do. And it doesn't really matter how good or bad they perform, they'll always perform excellently when connected to the groups that I'm talking about. They'll always get glowing reviews because it would be like, you're really good at this, aren't you? Yes, I am. Oh, I'm so proud of you. Thank you. I did a really good job, didn't I? Yes, you did everything I told you, didn't you? Yes, I did. I mean, yeah, puppet. Is Shelley Groats a puppet? I don't know. I think she might be a shell, a paper fiction that they'll find a crisis actor or a person that can play them most of the time. But they're there to be effectively a person that fulfills certain roles oftentimes. Is that what she is? I really don't know, guys. I think it's just weird that I find that they've always been pretty much at that group. They've been at PNNL for 30 years. I mean, that's pretty much like nearly a lifelong career. Um, you know, uh, I don't know. I've found too many things out at Hanford where it seems like you just have a lot of shell characters that they place in roles to sign off on like toxic waste fund projects. And so like when they don't want to have to wait for a lot of people to raise their hand and say potentially no to something they want to do, they just have a lot of people in key positions that again, they're paper fictions, but people will report to the job and say, I am so and so and become them realistically in all the right places at all the right times, then go back to sometimes being another person, part-time, or they may stay in one role full-time for years or decades at a time. But still, if you know how this group works, when you're assigned a role and you're in their, I guess you could say cult or organization, probably organization would be a better term, but it is very cult-like in the ways that they do things and occulted. um it's the types of ethos and norms that become that they don't really have a regular reality. It's like what the way an actor or an actress would switch from like a television series that they do for like 3 or 4 seasons to a movie is how they approach reality and their relationships within reality. They are people that are kind of there to have that kind of surface level connection to everything and not to have a static personality. And I think it fragments them and I think it fragments their real selves quite a bit. And that's the point. It looks really good, I think, when people join because they think, wow, I'm gonna have everything provided for me. I'm gonna always have a house, always have food, always have cars and shit. And I'm never gonna have to worry about anything. Sounds great. But the point is to get you into a group that does anything unquestionably, you know? And I would say that, you should take a serious review about that if you've gotten yourself caught up in something like that and not give it too much of your power or energy and certainly not give it away to anybody else. So before whatever, I'm gonna do a quick hang on really quick here. I'm gonna play some of my energetics material here shortly, but I wanted to wrap up this thing on my brother, showing you really quick what I discovered, just so that it's all clear and things like that. So that's where my brother wound up, is at Atkins Nuclear Solutions. As you see, they're based in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I think though that their actual base of operations, as far as like globally, is in Europe, if I'm not mistaken. So I think that's just where their US base of operations is, but they have other ones. And then let's see. Yeah, and so that's my brother. Really weird actually, because I have to be honest with you guys, like I was very surprised to find this photo of him, and because he never was able to grow much of a beard, and so I thought it was really strange, like, man, did he like Photoshop this or did he actually grow this? I don't know, man. Yeah, because I was actually poking at him, I think, in a live stream one time about that. And I just wondered, did it stick in his craw a little bit? Because I don't think I've ever seen him pose like in a professional photo with facial hair. It's always like that really polished, shiny, whatever shave thing going on, which is probably more, appropriate for a professional photo. I probably do the same thing. But yeah. So to be clear, guys, that was when it ended, but you can see he was at the National Security Directorate. You can see that even whether he's my brother or whatever, like you would know that he's at least a relative, right? Can we agree? So, in case you're wondering if I'm giving you the same information about the same person, that org chart matches. Yeah, that's him. PNNL, Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. But yeah, he was in that position for a year and 4 months, and that's what I didn't know. I didn't realize that about the same time I discovered it was right when he was on his way out. Strange how that worked. I don't know. But he, again, this is kind of common at PNNL and other places at the lab where people will perform a role in one function or whatever, and after the project is done, they're just not needed in that area the same way. So these people wind up transferring over to a place, oftentimes with promotion. I mean, these aren't bad things. They're almost always things that involve promotions. You know, So again, he was with DoE for a while back in the day or whatever. And again, my brother, full disclosure, was at SAIC. And again, this is the same, SAIC that has this CEO. So again, doesn't mean that my brother is like the people at SAIC who do this kind of fakery, but you can see he did get his early training right out of college. He wasn't even out of WSU, and SAIC was already bringing him in and paying for his schooling. And so the company that tries to pass these types of storylines off as reality and wants us to believe that this is something that, we shouldn't look any further or see that this is a cryptogram or a cipher, or that this person might be part of a larger network of buffer characters that have great professional credentials, but I don't know, they may not be entirely 100% authentic, or they may be half. I mean, maybe they actually went to school at all those places and everything else like that, but the likelihood that they were truly born with those names, or that if they were, that it had any other intention but something like more of a cryptogram, because that does happen now. And there's so many people that are doing this now that, yes, literally these people, when they're trying to raise their kids into this shit, they give them encoded, encrypted names, especially if it's honoring the person that's the master elite of their coven structure, the ones that are into the more ritualistic things and, occulted things. They will create mirrors of their leader, or the person they perceive as their quote master, or the person that's the larger wizard or witchcraft practitioner. And they'll do things always integrating their symbols and their names into the occult work of theirs. So like the leader's name becomes their name partially, or they integrate it in clever ways, numerologically or whatever else. It's just a thing that they do. Quite a few people do things in honor of my mother that way. I was really surprised to learn about that. Like there's people out there that really seem to perceive her as some sort of master practitioner of some coven structure. And look, it's not even saying my guess. Even though no one's given me a direct confessional, I do know that she identified or identifies, whether it's current or past, is up to her to say one way or the other. But she did tell me she was a Rebecca. And a Rebecca is, Rebekah spelled, a female member of the Independent Order of Oddfellows, which is an esoteric society. I don't want to say not unlike the Freemasons, because it's not like they're the Freemasons. They're not really like them. They're different, but you may say that they have similar types of appearances from the outside looking in. People might perceive them as a quote secret society or a mystic fraternal order, things of that nature, which they are. I would just argue that the ones that are the Oddfellows and Rebeccas, pretty much nobody blinks an eye at them. And that's something you need to pay attention to, especially if you blame Freemasons for everything. And I'm not going to suggest to you guys that there aren't Freemasons that do negative things. Of course, there are. Not every person from every group or every order, especially one as vast and large as the Freemasons, it's never going to have a squeaky clean record, okay, ever. And I'm not a person who's necessarily a defender or an apologist. I'm not a Mason myself either. But I don't rule out the possibility for quite a number of them to be benevolent and be doing very good work. And I do have an awareness that quite a number of them are involved with some pretty serious defense projects, which I do believe will have a good outcome for America on a broad scale. Like things that will make pretty much everybody happy, as much as you think that your values might be differently aligned than perhaps somebody in the military. If you're a person that maybe thinks more progressive or liberal, historically, quite a few of them sometimes aren't even open to that. And I think that you need to understand that a lot of these people just want you thinking for yourselves. They wish you had access to the same information they did. And I think they figured out who's hiding it. Because a shocking amount of our infrastructure is controlled by this company. I need you to understand. My brother spent his first 6 years, go back to this. Again, this isn't meaning that he is them or like them. But what I can tell you is that when it comes down to SAIC versus defending his little brother, he chose SAIC. He literally got on the phone with me when I did some reports about SAIC on my YouTube channel, put me on speakerphone, and I could tell there was some other, fellow, goons around there listening in. And I was like, are you serious with what I know the way you're deflecting against the real thing. Like, I know that you're distracting away from what I was actually saying in this report. Why are you doing that? Is like, well, he was basically nitpicking at the fact that I said that I read the document, and because I read the entire document, part of it said sole responsible party for contract. But it wasn't that I was pointing out that they won or was awarded the sole responsibility of a government contract, because that happens quite frequently. Like, no bid contracts are oftentimes awarded for somebody who has unique expertise or accesses or clearances to a project. They're required. You really can't eliminate them, even if you don't like their work sometimes. I mean, they would have to be exceptionally bad to get rid of them. You find that frequently, by the way, within these groups. I've even seen it in the wireless industry, guys, because there's such a lack of talent available in certain pockets that, yeah, they're forced sometimes to bring in, not that common, but yeah, you like go like, really, we got to use that company. I really didn't like their work last time. It's like, well, who else you gonna have? Well, we'll try to get their best person on it. And that's sometimes the best you can do. Um, anyways, so that's the thing on my brother and everything else like that. And I'm going to get into the next topic here shortly. All right. I'm going to play part 5 of energetics before I get into this. But I wanted you to see this whole thing with my brother's connection to bouncing from PNNL to Atkins. And then briefly, I'm going to tell you, like, I've done reports in the past. Maybe I'll play, you know what? That's what I'll do really quick. I'll do the thing that's about, God, did I do a thing on Leon Oskin that's like they have archived? I'm trying to think. Here, I'll just show you who the actor is. So this is Leon Oskin. And so if my research is correct, my understanding is that he could be a relative, and that the way he got into Hollywood was using an alias, and that was like either a direct relative of mine or was like a twin brother that looked a lot like him or something to that effect, where one person could be the other, or he was in fact this other person that was in my life who I don't want to discuss like right at the moment. Okay. And then I want you to take a close look at him, and I want you to study the look of Roseanne Barr now and how her facial expressions are. And if you ever watch a good amount of Leon Oskin's work, you're going to see a lot of similarities to inflections in voice, influence of the comedy style, and influence in the vocalization and body features, facial features, all of it. To the point now where I'm pretty convinced that I've had what I think has gone on is that his genetics are in my family and spread across different mothers. And that what they did was he would have a child with one mother from one bloodline, another mother from another bloodline, another mother from another bloodline. And they mixed all of these kids together as siblings into a household that was, close to me. But I don't think he did it in only one place. I think he did this in multiple locations potentially. That's that's something that I have as a I got some things from the sidelines is the best thing that I can tell you on that one. And the more I looked into it and the more people that got closer to my life in recent, I'll just put it this way. In the last few years, a person that also looked and sounded and acted quite a bit like Roseanne Barr found their way into my life. And I had to kind of go like, are you sure you two aren't like stepsisters or sisters or cousins or something like that? It's really weird how much you act alike and have the same like look and everything. And then both of them seem to have a connection to him. So I think what we're getting into here is sort of the way people from these bloodlines have spread their influence for many, many years and are seeking to continue that influence into this new media of YouTube by having multiple characters and reflections of influence within all of these different things. So remember, he's Leon Oskin, right? Well, keep in mind, this is what he's known for. He played a Nazi. He played like a Nazi king, a Kaiser, General Burkhalter on Hogan's Heroes. And so he was born with the name Leon Ashkenazi. You can imagine why, if this is true, why quite a number of people, for whatever reasons, would want to hide it. Good and bad reasons to hide it. I understand. But, people need to understand that I'm just not down with the fakery. And, let's be real here, folks. If you think that there's not a correlation between this, guys, like the winery that's close to his house and on the same block, Tulip Lane, where he had two relatives working, it's called Bookwalter Winery. Burkhalter, Bookwalter. Burkhalter, Bookwalter. They love doing this. Those very slight corruptions, you change one or two letters, sounds kind of the same. It's very much done with intention. Not just coincidence every time. Very seldom anymore, I would argue. It's very much done with intention. So do you think that the whole thing with Atkin and Ozkin is irrelevant? Well, that's all right. If you think it is, and you think that the correlation that I know about this and the people that are close to me know is true, but will deny, that's fine. Because again, where the burden of proof lies is in all these records. There's all these people that are actors that'll surround this narrative and go, that's not the way it is. Yet on its face that something is wrong with this story. And what is it with people that may have opposite values pretending to be Jewish and saying that you can't criticize them because, like they were a victim in Auschwitz or they were somebody that was held by the Nazis? Guys, I'm not saying that this guy did that. I'm telling you that it's a frequent cover to pretend that you were a persecuted Jew and then come to America as a Nazi so you can continue your Reich. And the best way to further your Reich is through genetics. So they know. Hang on really quick. Because you guys, now that you kind of understand that Gage Cruz thing a little bit better, who do you suppose? This is where it's going to get like, no, hang on. All right. Hang on there. Sorry. Gotta find my browser again. There you are. No, I lost you guys. Where are you? Where'd you go? No. No. Where is my... There you are. God, you guys. Sorry, I lost you there for a second. Like, where's my browser? Okay. You don't think that guy looks a little bit like Leon Oskin? On the right. Just a little bit. Look at the lips. Look at the lips, guys. Okay, that's Rose City Antifa. This guy right here posing with Keith Ellison, that's Rose City Antifa. So what do you think this is being done? Like all this drama that you're finding in the streets, what is it really about? I mean, if you discover that this guy is really like the grandson of a Nazi that pretends to be an ethnic minority, then you might assume that he's probably equally pretending to be an ethnic minority and can effectively look like one, but is not. He can run around telling everybody like, people with my color skin are going to jail while people with your color skin are going to college, and it's wrong. And he'll get all indignant about it, and he'll make it really realistic because he's an actor. A mafia gangster kind of hacker thug Grinch that stole Christmas type one, but nevertheless, yeah. I am not buying that this guy is anything but an elite bloodline member from a very powerful Hollywood acting family that has connections back to Operation Paperclip and who are likely imported into the Tule Lake concentration camp that nobody discusses in here except for pretty much me in this country, even though there's all kinds of public records that they imported about 1,000 Nazis where my family lived, my mother's side, in Tule Lake, California. It's called the Tule Lake Segregation Facility. I've done a number of stories on it. A whole bunch of these people who have this dark complexion from their Italian lineage are part of these Nazi bloodlines that run around here getting all of your attention going, I'm Latino. Cha-cha-cha. No, they're not, dude. They make a mockery of the culture. Sorry, I don't mean to do it more. I'm telling you, like, just stop. Latinos included, whatever you identify as, just stop believing all of this nonsense like division, ethnic identity bullshit that these people are trying to encourage and get you out in the streets to riot about, because it is rooted in bullshit. And these people are just wanting you all to be arguing so the country's destabilized. They hand everything over to the Chinese communists. And these people now that are pretending to be poor are just going to go enjoy their fucking mansions that they're already collecting. Like the head of BLM's got like 3 or 4 of these houses and mansions. I mean, you think these people are doing any different? Playing y'all. Everybody. I don't care if you're white, black, brown, yellow, whatever you identify as, you're getting played by them. And they're just actors. And they're just going to sit there and go like, yeah. Yeah, that's him arguing on the streets. Like, you know, like he likes to go around spitting in people's faces and everything like that. But I know this bloodline, man. I know this bloodline. I know this bloodline. Don't tell me, guys, you don't think, come on, man, you know this person. You know. Stop telling me that this guy ain't related to the bloodline. Stop telling me he ain't related to the bloodline. And he's an actor. He's an actor, bloodline family. He's an actor. So if he's one of the people causing all the destabilization inside Portland and getting everybody to riot in the streets, nobody's doing anything though. FBI is like, yeah, no, Gabe, we're not interested in your information. Yeah, you know why? Because he's an asset of the FBI. Sorry, all you chuds out there. He's a little FBI insider. Got news for you. You're reporting to the FBI. Congratulations. You still don't think so? You still don't think so? You gonna put a bag over your head, hey, Rose City Antifa, you gonna put bags over your heads and just try to deny the truth that you got basically an FBI insider running your organization? Are you shitting me? Hilarious. Hilarious, even. Or Keith Ellison. Remember I told you guys, Minnesota DFL and Portland politics always hand in hand. Fight the power. Minnesota DFL and Rose City Antifa. Man, how did that union of whatever happen? Interesting. Super interesting. So I don't, guys, that's why, like, I used to be a person, you can ask anybody I worked with. I was on the diversity council for 3 years in a corporation. I cared about all these things. I did. And I don't stop caring about it. It's not like I don't think anymore that people deserve a fair chance and that there shouldn't be things to ensure everybody gets a fair chance. Of course I believe in those things. I absolutely do. I've just learned that the false paradigm of diversity that is mostly promoted intentionally bad. It is intentionally bad. It is a false model that is there for division, and it is designed to create arguments. It's designed to make certain people feel jilted. It's designed to make certain people feel slighted. And it doesn't actually elevate our culture, and it robs everybody of what they really require to be better human beings. It really does. Before, I would have said that that's a conservative talking point. Now I've just discovered how true it is once I've discovered that the people who promote the narrative the most are the most divisive. They're destabilizing our country in serious ways, and they don't give a shit because they can just keep cashing in and going back to the bloodline family. And man, this guy has some of the most best designer clothes I've ever seen a motherfucker wear ever. I don't have clothes like that. Should see my Vans, man. My Vans are some worn out fucking shoes, man. I just proudly worn out. I love my Vans. I've got a pair of Vans that I've had for, just skater shoes, like black, solid black skater shoes that have lasted me. They're just now starting to show signs that I have to replace them, put it that way. And it's amazing. They've gone over a decade. So I'm sick of this nonsense because this is some bullshit right here. That's all. If you guys understand what this really amounts to, this isn't like some guy that's like in the streets that's getting access to power finally and gets to have a conversation with a major, like, hey guys, it's important that no. That's where the architecture is coming from. He's just one of the main puppets that brings it to the next puppet. In fact, which puppet's controlling which puppet? Because that's hard to tell with this bloodline. Louise might have his hand up Keith's ass. Think on that. If you know who this guy is. I don't want to give him any more press than he already has. He's been on, guys, if you're part of an Antifa wing and BBC has brought you on to their studio to be interviewed, you're a bloodline family member. You ain't from anything but that. And I know. I was interviewed on Miles Johnston's show. That don't happen. I mean, look, it does happen to some people with face masking and other things like that. A lot of people do things on there for whatever reasons, and I ain't saying that that's like super important or anything like that, but it did give me access to an international audience that a lot of people wouldn't normally get. And I was able to speak to things involving faux liberalism relative to the Nazis that were imported to the Tule Lake concentration camp on Miles Johnston's channel. It was an interview that's now been pulled from YouTube. Like almost everything I think was pulled. But it was like an hour and a half long thing where I talked about it in detail about my family's connection to it all. All right. So now we need to get into this whole esoteric concept of the occult sacrifice aspects. And I did some things on Twitter because all this is going to be connected. You're going to find it's a top-down control system. If you haven't followed the last two presentations, it'll probably be important that you at least been seeing the last few. Honestly, I know that's a lot of work and it takes a lot of time to get through it, but You would kind of need to, because I did a lot of whiteboarding of these things in ways that'll piece it together to a way that what I'm saying tonight will be way clearer. Okay. And so let me give you the Twitter link here. Hang on really quick. Now, here's my challenge, folks, and I say this out of nothing but like what I'm really trying to do with this. It's not done out of any sort of anger or malice or retaliation or anger or being upset. I'm frustrated sometimes with certain things or my inability to communicate them in a way that I think is consistently works for everybody. I think everybody struggles with that a little bit. But some of the material that I delve into, like, because, like, it was like for me, guys, even though I'll give you an example. There's this weird, I guess they call it cognitive dissonance that people go through, wherein, like, where the problem is the brain, because so much has flowed in relative to a topic that, this, like, you're trying to take in like a river's worth of water into, a funnel that can barely fit in the top of a 1 gallon jug, and it can only handle that much water going in at the same time. It's not a sign that that jug isn't perfectly good, or can't hold the water perfectly good or anything else like that. No, it just means that you shouldn't use a fucking fire hose to try to fill up that jug of water. That's not right. And I think myself, especially, I have to remember this, that nearly everybody's minds are a little bit like filling a 1 gallon water or whatever it is, like a gallon jug of water. It's a lot like that. I've talked about this metaphor before, like ways that you can use a 1 gallon jug of water is like this is sort of a spiritual philosophy of like how we get to like peace between individuals or groups or even nations, where you just use like a 1 gallon jug of water, and you put like a list, you agree upon a number of things that you must resolve, that can be resolved. I mean, they have to be resolvable, and you just sit down with the other party with this jug of water, and as you progress and make solutions that are put in place, or you resolve each issue about what your differences were so that you can just end the argument. Then once the jug is empty or there's still water in it, whatever the case is, I think it serves as a visual metaphor in either direction, whether it's good, bad, or indifferent, the experience. If you're left with an empty jug of water, then you have no problems and you have peace with this person. If you're left with a little bit, then at least you're left behind with the perception that a lot of the things that you had in your mind that were wrong are no longer there. You thought that they were this bad, then you learned that it was only like this much. And maybe even then you might learn, if you do more research, that you were wrong, myself included. Okay. And I'm not perfect. And I'll never claim that everything that I say is 100%. What I'm telling you guys is that when I show you everything that I've just shown you in repetition, I hope you understand just how much fakery's been around me, and how I've had to constantly just fight, like resist. I've had to fight the urge in my own mind to be a stupid optimist instead of just a healthy optimist. There's a huge difference between stupid optimism and healthy optimism. Stupid optimism is where you just put the blinders on and say, it's not happening. La, la, la. Don't worry. Be happy. This isn't going on. You know what? That's okay. And that works for some people. And if that's where they need to be, they should stay in that state of mind. And that's okay to be there. But there's certain lines where once you cross them, you can't go back to being that way. Your internal, especially if you're the most of the people that listen to this and are or whatever, they know that's their kind of personality. They can't easily walk away from learnings that they already have. Their mind is going to crave more information, even if it's caused them historically cognitive dissonance. So just getting back to the fire hose inside the water jug, that's my problem, guys. There's times, especially in these live streams, where I don't understand it almost on a consistent basis. I fire hose into a 1 gallon jug of water with my material. Like, and people like going, I get it, but man, that's a lot. So again, that's why the whiteboard has been good to have. It helps me organize my thoughts and everything like that. And I'll get deeper into that. Okay. So tonight's pretty serious though, so I'm going to warn you before I get into the next part. It's pretty dark what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to do my best not to do it in the way that most people do. I want to discuss it more scientifically and to talk about it in a way that instead of we just go like, we know they're killing people or they're killing children and doing these rituals. I don't want to approach it like that, guys, because it's already been done and nobody offers you anything that's specific to tell you that it's not just a story that's being told. There's been significant research. These are historical things that have gone on for centuries. And that's what I'm going to discuss in the next part here, guys. You can almost bookmark this. Everything I've talked about up until now, I kind of went backwards with the way I put it on the YouTube channel, but sorry. We're getting to the main topic now. And ironically, I might spend less time on it than I did the other one. So who knows here, but all right. Let me close this out because it's taking up too much bandwidth. All right. All right. So let me get that Twitter. I put Cornerstone. Hang on. Cornerstone sacrifice rituals still take place across the world, including the United States. And because it involves construction of buildings, people need to understand that an underground market economy would exist within the construction cement laying industries to facilitate burial of DNA or human victims. And then I quoted from this article, which if you go to my Twitter, I made sure that if you click on the photo, at least I hope I did. You know what? I don't think it's saved properly, but you should be able to get the link of the source. This is from New York Times. But it was an article about building construction and cornerstone rituals and how they had gone down in recent history. Like there weren't as many people that were doing cornerstone dedications within their construction projects. So it says in ancient times, the placement of cornerstones was related to the position of the stars and to religious significance. The blocks symbolize seeds from which buildings rose. Water and the blood from animal sacrifices might be sprinkled on the stone, or a darker legend has it, live animals or girls might be entombed within. That's just one example from a mainstream article that's not like, whatever. It's just discussing it historically as something that's been done, like Aztecs and Mayans and things like that. But here's where I think a lot of people don't really get that these aren't just things that happened back in ancient times. These aren't just things that are a historical whatever. These are things that are still occurring. I don't know what's safe to play with this story, and I have to be pretty careful because I don't want to get copyright struck here. So let me I'll probably mute it or play it at a different speed here. But I put here, Black Child Productions created this report about the industry of sacrifices in the foundation. Hang on. All right. In the foundation or cornerstone of a building. And you can see in the BBC report that they interview a man who's paid to place the DNA of a sacrificed child into a foundation as a ritual. Let's see here. This might. Oh, wait. There. That might keep the copyright thing from triggering. I don't know.
During the first meeting, Awali sacrificed a goat to bring luck to the business. A few days later,
yeah, I don't know. Hopefully it works.
To discuss what he regards as the most powerful spell.
I told you guys it's dark,
sacrifice.
so.
There are two ways of doing this. We can bury the child alive on your construction site, or we cut the child and put their blood in a bottle of spiritual medicine. If it's a male, the whole head is cut off, and his genitals. We will dig a hole at your construction site and bury the feet and the hands, and put them all together in the hole. Alan, do you recognize this man?
Awal.
We were introduced to this man, Awali. And do you recognize this man?
Awal.
And is he one of the men that took you, Alan?
Awal.
Yes? It's too dangerous to confront Awali, so we informed the police of our findings. Charities complain 900 reported cases remain outstanding.
All right. So you can kind of see, this gets way, way deeper into the topic, involving like the occult world and things that are going on in Africa relative to this industry. It's like 30 minutes long, and he uses a lot of material from major places like BBC. So I think that's why his channel gets taken down. So I don't want to take a similar risk here and potentially get, this material knocked down here. So I was trying to have to play that on 1.25 speed and things like that. Hopefully that worked and this doesn't have anything happen to it. Um, but if you watch the story in its entirety, you can find it on my Twitter profile, and I can send you a link here in the chat. But it's pretty revealing. Like, you start to see that there is this huge link between what's going on in Europe, like France, like this French influence across some of these countries, United States in some cases, heavy reliance upon Freemasonry for the influence of these politicians in Africa, their joining of these mystic societies, having entire, like Masonic rituals that are going on for these new inductees into African nations politics. I think he cites Kenya specifically and shows a lot of things relative to their elections and shenanigans too. And you really see how out in the open the practicing of the witchcraft is. Like, when a person wants to win an election, they'll actually do rituals where they set out a spirit they'll use witch doctors and do a ritual right in front of everybody, where he releases a spirit of confusion across all the voters. I mean, if you have good intentions on what you're going to do with the population, would you go out of your way to confuse the voters? Or would you want to enlighten them so they understood that you were the right guy because you were telling them the truth? No, if you're a shyster, if you're a liar, if you're a person is trying to deceive, a spirit of confusion is what you would release upon voters on the day of election. You would want them to be confused about the right person to vote for. You would want them to choose wrong at an intuitive level. You would want them to be confused about that. What are all these things? Do they actually do something? Do they actually mean something? This is where it gets tricky, because if you understand bioenergy, a lot of it has to do with what you choose to believe and what you don't believe. And so just delving in, this is where I kind of understand why people, especially of Christian faith, oftentimes associate even knowledge or awareness of these things as, quote, devilish or demonic, or they stay away from it because they believe it's, quote, evil or demonic. I do understand why they take that on as a belief system, because, again, it's a little bit like, once you know, then you have this new battle within your mind on what you are going to believe in when you know what is possible. And then you've got to get to the next layer of that onion, where you're kind of going, and then what is my role in either preventing or allowing or straight up manifesting things relative to what others have intended? Are you a passive conduit to another's intention? Are you repeating a narrative of another's intention? Again, like if you guys are going to ask me, like, do I want to talk about this person, that person? Guys, I don't talk about them because they're fronts. Okay. Are they real people? Did they really show up at those places? Did Epstein and Ghislaine and all them go to those places? Yeah. And did they hang out with a bunch of these people? Probably. But it's still a cover story. It's still a surface story. They didn't put a dent in human trafficking. They didn't put a dent in sex trafficking. They didn't put a dent in child exploitation. The can's still being kicked down the road. Harvey Weinstein, nothing's going to happen to him. He's always been a puppet producer. It's all there to create a sense in the population that when you fight it, it's never going to change and you should just give up. They're trying to get everybody to believe this. It's like every single news story is designed to leave you with this sense of hopelessness and that nothing gets resolved. And what I'm telling you is I don't spend time talking about it in great detail because I know a lot of it is fiction, because the Department of Justice wouldn't really be doing shit if they were really the people that were truly behind a lot of it. I get that they were there and they are figureheads and they are in control of it, but how decision making they are is about as much as I trust that Ms. Leonhardt really ran the DEA, as much as I think that that Rosenstein guy was really in a leadership at the FBI, as much as I think that Christopher Wray is truly running the FBI right now, as much as I thought that, Rod K. Quinn was running the lab where my brother worked. Shell characters played by actors who are increasingly proving that when they try to do the job in front of everybody, they look as incompetent as they are because they don't actually make decisions. All right? And so what we have is like, I'm challenged with this constantly. Like what you said to me is like, you want me to talk about shell characters. And I'm telling you that I don't want to talk about shell characters any more than to tell you, here's why they're shell characters. So I just did. So if that helps, there you go. I mean, I'll talk about it, but that's as far as I take it. I mean, just so you know, to me, if I spent like 2 and 3 or 4 hours on these people's names and discussing all of these details and any more than I have, honestly, to me, the more relevant narrative is not them. I think the thing that I should be discussing in more direct nature, and I will, is the whole John Griffith thing relative to CNN and what the hell's going on at CNN. To me, that's a way more relevant talking point because it speaks to the direct relationship between the media and child exploitation networks, the mentality of the people who run them, the cruelty and the disgustingness of these people's minds, and what they actually think up and actually follow through on doing. And the fact that we exist in a media environment that goes, no, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. Those things don't happen. Oh, that's ugly. Don't talk about it. Well, no wonder they're talking about that way, because they're doing it. I'm familiar with that deflection tactic. Again, there's a limit to how much we should talk about it. Like, maybe not bring it up, at Christmas dinner. Let that one be the time where you guys just enjoy some nice, peaceful time and nobody talks about the issue, right? That kind of thing. Yeah, the reach is a time where you need to just enjoy yourself and not discuss it. But what I'm telling you is that, finding that happy balance here, I don't know. But yeah, so obviously constantly talking about it, it would obviously fatigue or whatever anybody. And so I think that's the thing that I've been challenged with is like, I personally don't really want to talk about these topics. I get confronted with the information and I get taunted by the people connected to the networks pretty regularly. And so when you have that many reminders in your face, I understand like this is where I'll give kudos to people for reminding me that I have to pull myself out of it and I can't always whatever be thinking or discussing it openly. What that does to my brain, just to help you understand it, like it makes me think like too many times it's been covered up. I've seen cover up after cover up after cover up after cover up. And so that's what my brain's doing internally. It keeps shutting the person down who has good intention, who's just like, when I love you and I care about you and I just want to see you give your mind a break and our mind a break and us our time here, in peace. And when somebody makes a point like that to me, that I totally get. And if you have a partner in your life or something like that and they make that point to you or they try to remind you of that, I would say that here's what I'm struggling with at times, and hopefully this will help you if this is something that's going on with you or you struggle with this. Is that it's true. You have to give your mind some time to have humor in your life, to have love in your life, to just remind yourself that all these things are still possible. They do exist, and if you can focus more on those things and allow them more into your heart, these other things do in fact begin to dissipate in their influence and their effect, and fewer people it seems like the problems just begin to disappear a little bit through by not focusing on them. And I guess that's sort of the power of the human mind as a collective consciousness. The balance between that manifests through collective hive mind and plasma fields versus ignoring something obvious that's happening is what I'm struggling with. I've had too many examples of that fakery I showed you earlier in my life, and I know things are getting covered up relative to this topic. And this is serious. And since I've seen all the signs that other aspects involving other pieces of this were involved in other pockets where I was researching it, some of the pieces do in fact line up and point to there being an industry, okay, an industry that does this. And I would argue that when you see that BBC report that just showed up in that, a little bit of that, and I'm not trying to promote this as that. I'm trying to let you know that I'm acknowledging that it is a technique that's done sometimes. Oftentimes what you think is an expose on the topic is actually an advertisement. Okay? So I said, people know by now that CNN and MSNBC personalities are chock full of people with perverse interests and occult belief systems who hide the truths about these things. Is it time to take my information about these concepts more seriously, because it does happen in the US? And so I would like, I think at this point, and I do think it's worth doing, to play you certain aspects of Energetics Part 5, because the Cornerstone ritual I don't think will make much sense to a person, and why my study into it would be relevant to things that may occur around me. um what am I trying to say here, guys? Like, if I discover this about occult sacrifice, I do know there's an industry behind it. I do know I'm connected to a family of significant influence that does have hidden belief systems, occulted belief systems they don't reveal very openly, but have been kind of snuck into being told to me quite frequently. Or I had a direct confessional from my grandfather about what his predilections were. That would be on my mother's side, James Pettigrew. They straight up tell me, or he did. I mean, he confessed, you guys. He told me what he did, and on top of what I witnessed. So I know these people that are some of them, okay, based on my experiences, hold these belief systems involving occult sacrifice. Their belief in that not everybody here. Here's what I'm going to tell you is, and this is not a defense of it, it's just simply so that you can understand their minds better. What I'm telling you involving that everything's a universal plasma field and that we vibrate everything into physical reality, to them, that's a religion that I would argue for quite a number of them has robbed them and stripped them of their sense of humanity, because a lack of belief in physical reality and this sense that everything's a universal plasma field has made them believe and has intoxicated their minds into thinking that they're benders of plasma, manipulators of plasma, and that life is kind of an infinite cycle, that they don't have to honor the individual signature of the energy relative to the cycle that it's experiencing within this timeline, which is a human experience, which is a human light body, which is just your human DNA as you. And they believe that it's okay to manipulate you like clay, like putty in their hands, and to lie to you constantly. And it's a value system they have. And so all I do is make an appeal to people that I love and care about, especially, to please try to remember that this is in fact the culture that I came from, that I want away from very much. And I struggle sometimes with understanding when I'm walking on a bridge, and when that bridge is going to fall right out from underneath my feet, when they've been designed intentionally to explode underneath me, virtual ones. And what I've just learned to do is understand that this is a horrendously sophisticated system of manipulation that most people that have gotten involved with or have been close to know either not to F with, or they're too intimidated to try to escape. And I, to a lot of people, when they see me, represent, I think, a bridge or an opportunity to get out of that. But then they're oftentimes confused about what that bridge would look like, just as I was, and still am to some degree, even though I can tell it's getting crossed and it's being built. It's in progress. But it does involve cybernetic grids, that a greater awareness and a greater understanding of what reality is truly based on and what we're really experiencing relative to DNA and in human genetic material. So I think that's why Energetics 5 is a relevant piece for me to show you here. It may make this material longer than I intended, so sorry about that. I wasn't really intending on going on this long, but I need to, because I can't have anyone telling me on any level, guys, whether whatever, that it's, you can't roll your eyes at this. You can't say that doesn't happen and there wouldn't be people that get paid to do it and there wouldn't be an ecosystem to launder. No one's going to say killing a child, burying its head and arms and legs into a hole for sale in front of their business. No, it's going to be a cement mixer. It's going to be a construction company. It's going to be somebody that operates under a guise that would offer them the ability to lay the cornerstone or foundation or be involved somehow in the process in a significant way. Right? We can agree on that. So I have to review those materials closer if I find something that's shenanigan-y relative to it and it rings as nothing but false. I have to look deeper. With my own family, I've had to look deeper. And I didn't like what I learned. And you know what? I still offer, just because IP routes can get manipulated, these data sets can all get crossed. Maybe some of it's not true. You know what? I actually thought, I'm so optimistic. Okay. I actually set out, when I started learning negative things, a good portion of what I intended to do was sort of like liberate my family from an unfair judgment. And I still actually would like to do that for the ones that have zero to do with this. They don't deserve to have their names muddied in any of this, because there's a lot of really good natured, strong, warm, kind hearted people that I dearly love that are in my family that I miss them desperately, honestly, because I'm fearful actually that there's a good likelihood I won't get to see some of them again, just because of what this has done as far as causing rifts. But I speak the truth, and it's not my fault that these things lined up the way they did, and that not everybody had an awareness of how vast it was and how far and deep it goes. And it's not my fault that some people lost their way. It's not my fault that some people that you hoped would do better and be better turned out not to be those things. But you shouldn't, well, you probably will, but you shouldn't judge me on that. And all I can do is tell you that, for those of you, I apologize. I should have been better about communicating my information and had my act together, not act, but my, um, bad word. I just should have had my shit together. How do I say it? I should have been looking better. I should have been stronger in my presentation. I should have had, all my information lined up in a way that was unquestionable and unflinchably good. And it was always to the credit of somebody who gave me this feedback, who I do feel good about. And they told me, like, you look like a mess, man. And a person like me is not going to listen to you. I'm telling you that because I care about you. He said that to me. You just kind of look like a mess right now. And if you've got something to say, I want to hear it. But the way you're going about it, it's emotional and you just look kind of messy. And he was right. See, I didn't like hearing it. Kind of pissed me off a little bit, but I also knew that he was right. And so I took that into my heart, and eventually over time, not right away, but eventually it helped me be this, what you see today. And it was a far cry from the way I began doing this material. When I first did my interviews, I was pretty much a pushover for the most part, because I hadn't learned about all these esoteric things yet. And what you're witnessing here is a culmination of about a good 5 years of very solid deep diving into bioenergetics and how the human DNA responds to frequencies from the earth and earth materials. So, building on that, what I just said, that's where I'm going to begin Energetics 5 here. And I'm going to maybe interrupt it a couple of times, and I may not finish the entire thing. Hang on, I'm going to open it up in YouTube. I don't want it to play in the browser here. How long is this one? Yeah, I don't know if I'll play the whole thing, but we'll see. So after doing this article on the bioplasmatic connection between our geometry and how the POR/DOR spectrum of energy can actually play into the manifestation of inventions and things like that. It got me thinking more about magnetic tape and the materials that are used in them, and how magnetic tape came into being. Because sorry, I got the volume. Getting back to the concept of the spiral, it operates on a concept of rotating reels, materials that are used in them, and play into the manifestation of inventions and things like that. It got me thinking more about magnetic tape and the materials that are used in them, and how magnetic tape came into being. Because again, it operates, getting back to the concept of the spiral, it operates on a concept of rotating reels going across a tape head. And so I started thinking about, since that acts as a memory, as a source, what are the materials that are involved with that? Because I never really thought about it much until recently. And as I started looking into that, early magnetic recording, they say began around the 1920s. It was something that was more of a German innovation. So naturally, around that time, you can see that the Nazis were probably innovating it most. Is that annoying? Probably had the earliest access to it, even before the Americans did during pre-World War II and into World War II. They had a lot of advancements in the radio communication, as well as magnetic tape recording. So there's a definite correlation between these things, especially as it relates to broadcast industry. But we'll talk about that later. But audio recording didn't really gain widespread acceptance in the U.S. until the 50s. So I started thinking about, what are the materials that are used inside tape, and how does that relate to like human DNA? Like, are there common materials? Because think about it as a binding material for memory, and then how does that translate to earth materials as well, right? Because obviously whatever you're going to get to put in a magnetic tape is going to be an earth material, right? So I started thinking about how that might connect to different etheric osmosis processes between whatever the layers are within the human blood layer and whatever might be inside the metallic layers that binds magnetic tape. And so when I looked that up, it said that it was iron oxide and chromium that are most used, but specifically iron oxide seems to be the most common material, with chromium being more of a later innovation. And then I started looking up, what are the other things that iron oxide work with, and I guess it's a common thing involving plant growth and soils as a oxidation layer, and also it's involved with the human iron oxide, the human hemoglobin process in the DNA levels involves iron. So now we have a common material here with iron oxide, and how that binds potentially between the human DNA, magnetic tape, and the earth materials that magnetic tape is made from. Because even if it's an artificial invention, it still comes from organic materials, and that's something we always have to remember. So it's funny, actually, I just thought of this, but Robert Anton Wilson said there's no such thing as an inorganic invention, because even if it's artificial, it has to originate with organic materials. So I always thought that's an interesting thing to observe. But how does that relate, though, once we get to that, and we're thinking more in terms of, hemoglobin as a communication or a binding layer, how does that relate to different blood groups, because they say like people with Rh negative have, like this, maybe potentially more psiability, or the ability to maybe transmit, receive data at larger footprints or larger spheres of influence, as it were. And I think there might be something to that. I just haven't really, I don't have a lot of the medical background or a deep knowledge of blood groups and things like that through which to really understand these things more intrinsically. It's just more of an intuitive thing that I've observed through people, and, observations from reading and hearing things and things like that. So I just started thinking about, this gets back to the Showtime series Homeland, and the character Carrie Matheson, played by Claire Danes, who she's an investigator in the CIA and a field agent. And, she has this, they call it an episode of the show, but I think it was more that she was just heavily tapped into an intuitive communication pattern, where she jumps out of a car of her sister's and she runs to the park, and she's really into this, what she's learning about this case, to where she's almost, she can't stop investigating. She's really into it. But she jumps on the ground and she starts feeling the earth, and she says, I can't remember the exact line was, but she says, like, this is how it works. There's roots, and these plants all go into the earth, and those roots go to other roots, and they go to the trees, and this is how it works. And I really understand what that means now, because I think that potentially connects to the iron oxide levels in soil. I mean, really, let's think about this less as a esoteric or a new age concept and more about a science. There's iron oxide levels in the soil, you have iron oxide in your blood, and then once you start drilling down to what that looks like, you get into the hemoglobin layers. That the iron oxide looks like these spiraled coils right within your DNA. And so, since there's been a lot of talk about how those spiral coils are like communication layers, then it kind of makes sense why that people sense things, right? That you have a sense of the weather, you have a sense for like intuitive into it, things of that nature. It kind of makes sense because when you really get down to it, you're tapping into one of the earliest forms of internet. You know, you're by touching the soil, you're tying into a root that's like plugging into a LAN port, and now that LAN port has access to all these routers and network nodes, and then they can access other network nodes, and those are the trees roots, because the trees tend to have deeper roots that spread farther, right? So you think about that in terms of how it works in communication networks. These were the early communicators, and so if you really think about what blood represents and different blood groups represent, it could just be that some people have always had, since birth, a stronger communication connection to the earth via the iron oxide content in tandem with things like copper, potentially, because that's a conductor. A lot of these things could potentially be playing into why some people have intuitive ability, and in tandem, why they might also be selected sometimes without their permission or knowledge for testing, in environments where maybe these things are being done to them or extracted from them without their permission. So I think it's a debate that's worth having. Because let's getting back to it. Who was able to use this tape, the magnetic tape, the earliest? And I think that we have to start studying that. Who were the earliest users of videotape? Who were the earliest users of magnetic tape that recorded audio, reel-to-reel technology, cassette tapes? And who recorded their voice onto those tapes? And where are those tapes today? Are they still lasting? What types of materials are on them? How does that bind to us as humans? If we left iron oxide from the resonation to the frequency of our voice onto that tape, it still exists at that etheric level. If you really think about it, it's still kind of communicating and resonating in a way. And maybe if you were even to study magnetic tape and place it into the Carillion photography, you could maybe learn something, assuming it wouldn't erase it in the process. I don't know how that would work, but it might be worth investigating, to see if a tape might have a life force to it via that iron oxide content and the bioplasma potentially connected to it. And these are the type of tests that I'm interested in doing, just so you know. I mean, I think these are things that are very worth doing. But when you think about the DNA as kind of a spiral coil that broadcasts like an antenna, and it's more of like a pumping or a pulsing spiral as opposed to a waveform. This may be why that POR, positive orgone, and deadly orgone radiation spectrums are so misunderstood. It's difficult to quantify because there's more of a randomness. I think it feeds into the spiral, the golden ratio, more so. And more randomness than other forms of technology and communication layers, and that might be why it's less predictable, therefore less controllable. Like, you're not going to ever really get down to the key of this because it's infinite. It's always existed and will continue to exist when you get down to it, right? So all anybody can ever do is find the numeric patterns that are within that spiral and tap into it. And so when you think about what magnetic tape is really doing, because it's all involving a spiral, not a single one of these technologies doesn't involve them going around in a circle. All it's doing is just basically tapping into the mathematic patterns, and it's sort of mimicking a process that we communicate with potentially with our iron oxide levels and hemoglobin between human beings, and how that connects down to the earth. And that a lot of our communication layers may be less above us and maybe more below us. Like, the arches of your feet connect to the grass, and then there's a communication layer that you're automatically tapping into via the roots and into the trees. It's something to think about. And so, getting into more specifics about how does that play into DNA as a read-write mechanism, right? So if it's magnetic tape and you can read-write to it, how does this translate to bioplasma being transferred potentially from the recording of these activities onto videotape? Meaning, as actors and actresses potentially are acting in a movie, for example, or maybe people are just recording, home movies or whatever and everything like that, and they're experiencing a range of emotions while this is all happening. How does that translate to that bioplasma, the iron oxide and their levels being transferred over to that magnetic tape, you see? Because in a way, it's sort of like a copy and an imprint of everything that's occurring within the surroundings, the resonation of your voice, or the visual image of your 3D self, right, as it appears on screen. So really, when you're thinking about this, it's sort of like that iron oxide is just taking this sort of DNA imprint of a space-time in addition to like those spiraled coils in tandem, because it's involving this complex series of magnetic resonance, and a little bit of electromagnetic interactions there too, via the technology being delivered over electricity. See, so I think that you're dealing with something that's pretty esoteric, but really when you get down to it, it's sort of a mimicking of a human process like we find with other technologies. So I'm just thinking about how this translates to why we've had these cultural shifts, thinking more sociologically, why our culture's turned a little bit dark. There's more films that seem to revolve around trauma, torture, human sacrifice, or what we call in this country ritual murder. It seems like there seems to be a normalization of cannibalism and vampirism in television shows and in Hollywood. There's more singers that are talking about it. There's more people saying that they openly practice cannibalism. There's things called the Cannibal Club and things like that. So I'm wondering, what is driving this culture, because it seems to be something that I think has been hidden underneath for a very long time, but is just now sort of being brought out into the open. And I think it specifically involves what people at a more esoteric level must have understood for a very long time about the way your blood at a DNA level has certain metals or iron oxides or whatever that's inside your hemoglobin. Chromium, for example, is another form that can interact. And so what happens when blood spills into the soil is really that you're having materials that are common to the earth that are returning to the earth. And then over time, it starts to interact with the iron oxide iron oxide levels in the soil. And as it goes down further into the earth, then you have crystal concentrations. And so thinking it through, you really are seeing that, crystals and crystal concentrations, crystal caves really are sort of like a storage media for everything, because it's effectively everything that's been translated from the human experience and all other forms of human life and other plant life, all condensed within these collections of crystalline formations that involve all these materials, and oftentimes it'll have mixtures of some of these magnetic materials that make it more luminescent too at the same time. So thinking through about how this correlates to the extraction of ether, I think we can talk about that another time. Like, are there more subtle ways of extracting these types of energies, not just like blood, for cannibalism and things like that, but more as an etheric, orgone, like bottled orgone, that can be used either to traumatize people or for bioenergetic weapons, or potentially as like a healing elixir, because you have to think that there's mechanisms through which to do this. And if you've been following my research, I'm going to expand on that a little bit more, because I have some theories on how it's happening, but I don't want to get into that right now. So how does that communicate, or how does that correlate to crystal communication? Because, if you think about it, a lot of our technologies are using crystals, right? So, we're really, sometimes they're synthetic crystals, but what really is anything synthetic if it's always made from organic materials? Once you form a crystal, whether it's mimicked or through the organic process, I think it just really depends. And then you have a series of processors that are out there using a common crystal that are oscillating at the same frequency. It's really kind of doing something similar to the way that people more intuitively communicate at a psychic level or an intuitive level, or receive information from trees and roots, which really, when you think about it, is your hemoglobin has spiraling coils, and it's interacting with iron oxide levels at a similar level and various other metals inside your bloodstream that are in the soil. They can sort of travel through pulses, maybe through the arches of your feet or something. Again, this is a lot of hypothesis here, but that it's exploiting that existing communication network of trees and roots and plants and roots and things like that to talk to other people. And then, what got me thinking more in terms of this involving the whole sacrifice culture was the film Zardoz, because it involves this, plot line surrounding these groups of people that are separated in these zones called brutals and exterminators. And the brutals are just there to basically be exploited and killed by the exterminators. And the exterminators are taught by their god Zardoz to hate all life and to basically just exterminate everything.
Hey, don't blame that on me, H. I don't need the Kardashians after my ass, too.
Production. So I thought that was an interesting plot line. It has Sean Connery in it, and I don't want to give away the plot or anything like that, but throughout the entire movie, there's constant communication with crystals and asking crystals questions, and the crystals are speaking back and telling them that they function as a bit of a god brain and things like that. So I don't know. As a matter of research, it might just be worth seeing, but I don't like to tell.
Actually, guys, I mean, Zardoz, despite the fact that it's pretty heavy material, I think if you're looking for something that's brilliantly encoded,
I don't think it's designed to confuse anyone. I think it's there really to put together a lot of pieces about what they perceived the future was going to be, a futuristic society where people would be able to open up the telepathic parts of their mind through technology, and that there would be an elite class of people that would be in control of that, and they would begin to see the need to separate themselves from the rest of society. And it would make them, as a result, like a little bit more cold and a little bit more distant, and able to let a lot of people fall by the wayside and maybe get, well, I mean, honestly, they just let a lot of people die. They don't do anything about it, and they learn to just sort of live their lives and move on. And it's a pretty amazing film, the way it discusses like crystal technology, the way that nearly every character, in order to gain access to information, has to communicate with a portable crystal that they carry around in their hand or on their finger or on a necklace, which to me seems like the way a person in the 70s would perceive what a cell phone would be today. If you told them, that there would be a device that basically everywhere in the future we would be, and actually in the 70s they could conceive of this because I'm sure that they were operating on, oscillating crystals. But um, the point is that this notion that everybody would have a portable device that they could like readily carry around and access information, and then all the other ways that like life is valued or devalued. It's really brilliantly discussed in Zardoz, but I'll remind you, very adult film. It's very sophisticated in its themes and exploration of them, but it also does it with a very dark sense of humor. So you have to be a person with a little bit above average level of sophistication, I think, to really absorb it properly. Otherwise, you'll just look at it and kind of go, yeah, I don't even want to bother with this. But yeah, I'll remind you, it is pretty heavy as far as the themes that it covers beyond anything even that I've talked about here. Okay. Anyways, back to this.
Human processes, and then it might make more sense why, as we've advanced these technologies and used them over and over again and fed more of these common materials into this spiral and recorded memories of our imprints into those recorded materials, how those are feeding into the spiral. It really is sort of, it's developing that spheres of life, the spheres of influence. I've discussed in my other materials. It's sort of like people who were the earliest ones who recorded their voice or their faces or likeness or whatever onto either recorded media of an audio or an audio video layer like videotape. They seem to have gained some energy at a bioplasmatic level. And I think you could argue, especially when you start studying what may have happened with Hedy Lamarr, I think that there's a direct parallel between how that translates over to people within the connection to magnetic tape and videotape, where there's a bioplasmatic connection via those hemoglobin iron oxide levels. How when people hear the voice of a person or see the image of a person and respond to it at an emotional level, how they bioplasmatically will resonate at those coiled levels, right? And that would be, I guess, partially your iron oxide levels and its interaction with things like the copper content in your bloodstream. Thinking it through, that these aren't antennas that have like your standard elements like you typically see on a cell tower. They're more of these coils that have a little bit of a randomness to it. They're patterned, I guess. I'm not a blood expert or a DNA expert, but when you think it through, you can kind of see that they're kind of coiled antennas that can pulse and resonate, right? So the manipulation of that, the same way that like you place a crystal inside technology and it oscillates at a set frequency to make it work. If they do that to people, they're also getting different people to sort of resonate at the same frequency, right? Just it's a little bit esoteric. I don't want to get too deep into that, but thinking through in terms of archaeometry, if all of the past blood that's been spilled into the soil, is just human ether extracted and returning to earth, and it's concentrating as a crystal and other forms of minerals like en route in tandem, it's not just like the trauma from blood spill. It would also be the positive orgone radiation that's also experienced, right? And that would be through like loving expression or through sexual energy. It's also something that can bind etherically and into the crystalline formations, you see. So really everything that we're experiencing here, whether you accept that it's, a real thing or not, depending on your belief systems, it still has an organic material that's returning into this collective source, whatever you agree upon that is. So what we experience here is relevant. We can't make arguments to say that this is all just a 3D
experience, because we're actually alchemically dealing with specific materials that are binding everything we're experiencing here to the soil and to the earth, right? Where it recirculates and then we re-experience it. And so I think you have to think about that in terms of why they do certain things involving potentially like ritual sacrifice at certain locations, why it's important for them to go to hilltops and mountains and perform, death rituals and ritual murders and things like that, because this is how they bind etheric energy via iron oxide, copper, and other things. And that's why they'll have high levels of concentration of these blood spilled in these areas, So I don't want to get too dark on this right now, but there's a positive aspect to that too. And that, similarly in these locations where there was trauma experienced, one would have to, understand that it could be reworked through positive orgone and positive orgone extraction in similar locations to change the dynamics there. That's my hypothesis. Whether or not that it's real, I don't know, but I think it's worth investigating. And at bare minimum, you have to, accept that when we really think about what we should be placing our energies into and everything like that, I think that this is a concept to study as a science, as a research topic, and all the ways that it can be explored in a lot of different ranges. It's definitely worth looking into, just as an exercise of what's possible through positive intention, and I'm not trying to sound hokey or anything like here, or I don't know, I'm not trying to be contrived or anything, is all I'm saying. It's just that when we're thinking about what we should be placing our energies into and what we should be focusing on day to day, maybe this is a way to reverse some of the harm that's been done, is if we can identify locations where there's been trauma induced into the location, I guess you could even say like haunted locations or something like that, and try to reintroduce positive orgone spectrum energy into there. And if we're able to do measurable tests where we can see how, the different types of dormant energy electromagnetic fields change through anchoring positive orgone in areas that have typically had dark orgone, placed in them, I think that would be worth studying too. There's a lot of ways you can integrate paranormal research and things like that, because I do believe that there's a science to these things that are just merely hidden or just too esoteric for the average person to understand without going through a great deal of time and dedicating a lot of their energies towards learning it. So, me personally, kind of stumbled upon it through some of this, the concept of Hedy Lamarr, and thinking through about how spread spectrum plays into frequency hopping and the programming of water potentially, right? So, Hedy Lamarr invented with somebody else this concept of frequency hopping that's been introduced in the concept of Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and CDMA technologies. And I worked with CDMA for years. It's code division multiple access technology. That was the core technology behind everything that I worked on. So one thing I've always known about is it had a lot of esoteric patterns. Even before I was even studying those things, it was inside the technology I was working in. So a lot of things that feed into that golden ratio, the 8x8 into 64, right? And you have this Walsh code that is part of the encryption, part of the scrambling. That's 64 by 64 Walsh codes, again, involving the random scrambling. And then they also have a concept involving CDMA technology, and that was called channel elements. They would divide up the traffic and distribute the data and the call traffic across different frequency carriers, right? So, and those would come in increments of 32, 64, 128, 192, tapping into, again, that 32, 64, 128, that same types of math. So you get into the same numbers again, and back to that golden ratio, And so I kept wondering, maybe just by virtue of being around these frequencies and patterned, modulation schemes of a very specific type, is it possible that just that interaction, trained my mind at a subconscious level to understand esoteric numerology? Because I just sort of understood it. It's just like one day I just had this awakening, and I started to understand very esoteric concepts involving numerology and math without understanding how I learned it. So I know there's a certain unknown element to understanding these things, because I don't believe that I was intelligent enough to just sort of understand it all. It just sort of happened, right? And so I think a lot of times when I was working with the technology, it was just really mimicking a human process, which is being influenced and bringing into manifestation the ability to make these technologies work, just because of the archaeometry involved with sacred and ancient math, and they've always practiced these certain types of numeric concepts that were patterns, right? Because if a person can get this many objects by this many objects, it was a simple way of doing math before you could write things down. When you think about it, really think about it, it was something you could visually place there before you could even, a person wouldn't even have to know what a number is. You could just show them that's 8 blocks there. Now I need you to stack those 8 and 8. All right, good. Now see that many and that many. Now do that over there. You know, think about it. We didn't have blueprints. We didn't have computers. How were they developing all this, architecture? It was because they were introducing archaeometry in other ways through symbolic communication, through shapes and symbols. And it's still happening today, just at a higher level and more in our subconscious. And so when you think about it, and thinking through what Professor Emoto discussed involving water frequencies, our body's 70% water. And I'll try to expand on this again in another material because I don't want to do it in this one yet. But thinking in terms of Professor Emoto and like the positive aspects and the negative aspects and how water is programmable. Our bodies are 70% water. Our water has a frequency. And so if you change that resonant frequency of your body's water, then again, you're starting to manipulate the interaction of those iron oxide levels and hemoglobin on a way because, really the water's mixing with all these other things inside your body. So, yeah, I'll get into that in an upcoming material, more into Professor Emoto, spread spectrum, Hedy Lamarr, and CDMA, I think, because there's something to this whole notion of the way you program water cells through positive intention and negative intention through the sound of your voice, what your intentions are in your words, and how that translates to programming at a frequency level and through your hemoglobin and your iron oxide levels. Because I'm trying not to sound too foo-foo here with my talk. I mean, I want you to understand there's a science to this that I believe that we just need to understand better. And I'm not trying to speak at some sort of new age construct here. So yeah, just thinking through about the DOR and POR spectrum involving the way our blood interacts at that iron oxide level and those different things interacting with the soil. And, it's just food for thought here so that we can start, getting the discussion going. So anyways, thank you for your time and we'll pick this up later. Bye.
Yeah, I mean, this is a lot of my material that I did relative to my research. It's all there. Not all of it actually, but the majority of it I placed in this archive when I did anything that was with the Orgone Helionosis Life Meter. Excuse me. Like this is like one place that like really surprised me because it was out in the middle of the desert. And I guess all I was trying to do was prove to myself that the things that had been asserted to me were in fact true. That if somebody says to me in some of these, since I started like doing these things with the basis projects, the interviews back in 2016, all these different people of varying esoteric and occulted beliefs would approach me with, pretty new agey sounding concepts involving their beliefs that I had been accustomed to just simply not believing, but was open to gaining an understanding of. And I would hear things like, well, trees have a consciousness and trees actually experience emotions and trees do this and the body has frequencies and the brain can be manipulated using these types of methods from these types of towers. Or again, lots of different hypotheses, lots of different information thrown my way, and to me it was pretty intriguing and compelling. Like I wanted to understand if it was true or not. I was open to some of even the most far out concepts being true. However, based on my work experience, I knew quite a few of the things that people were telling me relevant to technologies that I had personally worked on were simply inaccurate. Now, that being said, hang on, let me switch back my camera here. Yeah, so that being said, I just learned, I guess, hang on, I learned basically to, how do I say it? Like ever since then, when it came to the research that I was doing, I've just been trying to like find that balance between like not letting people just because they have a certain perception of things, I guess you could say, push me in or overly influence me into researching something that I'm not interested in researching at an intuitive level, because I have to follow intuitive threads at my own pace. Otherwise, it doesn't work for me. I don't like having too much push. I like some suggestions, though. I mean, it's not like it's without value. But what I'm trying to say, though, is that what I was trying to do was just prove to myself that if at an intuitive level, some of the concepts sounded like they were true, or I asked for further evidence of what those people's like support. Like, what are the studies you can show me that says, for example, that every part of the body has a frequency, and if you can show me what that chart is, and they would oftentimes, they would show me varying charts saying this organ vibrates at this frequency, this organ vibrates at frequency, this is the color of this organ, this is this. I mean, again, telling me all the different parts of the chakra system, almost always in some sort of new age way, and wasn't very scientific in nature. And the few times somebody gave me something that was, I guess you could say, more science based or had numbers attached to it, as soon as I asked that dicey question of where did you get those numbers, who provided those frequency sets, what was their method of measuring those frequencies? Because just because somebody shows me a chart that says the heart is this many megahertz, I'm like, all right, so where did you hook that up to? What, I mean, did you attach something to their chest and that's how you know? I mean, where did this come from? Where was your spectrum analysis? How did you come up with that value? And so when I would subject it to further scrutiny, I would get a lot of this sort of resistance. And again, I wasn't trying to be obnoxious about it or anything like that. It's just the way that I'm wired. I'm more of an engineer technician type mind from my career, even though I wasn't really that way before I got into that. And so I think that had kind of an effect on me, as far as how I review people's technical criticisms, which is why, like, look, that's why I produce charts like this in addition to equipment that will create measurements. And then I put this type of chart of what I learned about why I think trees talk and why they communicate. I'll put this chart next to the research that you see over, on the right there, or rather this illustration here. Like, for example, what I'm trying to show you guys here, if this doesn't make sense to you, is think of this as the varying earth layers, and then down deep, deep, deep underneath the earth in all these cave structures, there's a lot of crystal caves and a lot of quartz within all the layers going all the way up into the soil, including little pixie dust layers of crystal quartz that are lined all the way in here, that act as a communication layer all the way up into the root structure that the trees find themselves in. And these trees, especially the ones that get really tall, have these long roots. They go deep into the earth and they find one another. The earth resonance finds them all. And so when you have that, what you begin to have is a common clock, a common frequency. When you have a common frequency, and then you have evidence that there is in fact something beyond that, an etheric signature that a human would generate also attached to a tree, that's when this got super, super interesting to me, was when I did that crystal geyser, Olancha, Oregon life measurements, tree root versus sand, stronger PUR near tree root. A really basic thing, guys. I hadn't even learned how to use the equipment yet. But even when I was making errors, even within those errors, like the basic raw measurements were still relatively accurate. Sometimes I didn't have the right probe or used it in the right method, or I had my magnification on too much in a couple cases. So I apologize for those errors to anybody who's a purist, but it doesn't take away from the findings that I had in some cases, which was that I would just observe that the measurements, when I placed this life meter, which was just creating what is the orgone measurement in like desert sand, and then I would just get closer to the tree and see what the orgone measurement was there. And I was just learning that there's something to this notion of there being a clock, a common frequency, that the earth like has a heartbeat of sorts.
And it's a resonant clock that seems to, through this quartz substrate that exists all over the world, everywhere, that finds its way like pixie dust into everything and is used in electronics in a similar fashion. Again, what makes your computer time and do everything at the same clock is also a quartz. And it oscillates at a certain frequency, which gives it the timing so all the different things can communicate. So how did they learn about that? My guess is they replicated nature. They learned about these different layers of quartz crystal, the various things about iron oxide, what rust amounts to, what that does within the layers of your body, how you can make these things interact with the soil, and what happens. Look, this is the life affirming concept. I'm showing you, yeah, there's the dark side of it, guys. Blood sacrifice. This is why they do it. Why would they do blood sacrifice relative to this? I'll tell you why. This is actually, I didn't really explain this, but it's for the same reason, like why these trees can communicate and why they act as like they're almost like the original cell towers, why technology is a replication of nature. Okay. Because you, just like the cell towers go, they all have to have a common clock. They operate off of GPS timing. Every cell tower will have a GPS puck, and if it loses its timing, it won't be able to communicate with the other cell towers. That doesn't mean it's coming from satellites. It just means that if it's not on a clock that all the other cell towers are at a very precise thing, then yeah, you can't whatever. Okay, you can't. It won't run properly because everything has to be on the same timing. It has to be on the same signal clock. And I would argue that the same thing kind of exists within nature, that what you have with earth resonance here relative to crystal quartz, and as it travels through the earth layers here and the roots travel down closer to the cave structures, and you combine that with earth resonance, you have replications of, well, technology is a replication of the earth's machine, and that's just what happens within the Fibonacci sequence. The earth is the life machine, the original mother machine of all of our collective consciousness that's built off the model of us. The earth is us. It's a combined collective hive mind manifestation that we've all placed into existence through our combined energy and thought forms, and what we manifest through a shared plasma field. And so what that results as far as physical materials is crystal quartz, the same way that within your human brain you also have the quartz, correct? You have something that's called the pineal gland, and the pineal gland is also operating on this concept. Now, to get deeper into this, within, sorry, let me just, we don't need this anymore. Well, actually, I need to preserve that for something else. So, all right, maybe I'll do it here. All right. Yeah, I don't need to do this swimming with sharks thing. So when you get into the concept of like ritualistic sacrifice, or what they're doing with resonant frequencies, is the point is that DNA and blood are like frequency programmable through resonance, vibration. Okay, so when you get down to that, what's happening to the person at a brainwave level? Let me get a thinner pen here. Hang on. All right. Actually, let me get rid of this because I don't need these words here anymore. It's going to distract me. So what you got basically is within the human brain here in the hemispheres, right? So this is inside the person's brain. Right here is the pineal gland. And again, remember, the pineal gland is, it's surrounded by crystals. The center of your brain is surrounded by crystals, right? So when you think about that relative to the earth, then you must know that if you have this human resonance that's providing timing to like things like trees through these common materials and soil relative to those quartz layers, it is like a communication layer that can vibrate things into frequency, resonance, frequency and vibration. Just like what this process involves within the human brain brings the earth into manifestation through the collective hive mind. Because down here, then you have your hemispheres of the brain, but you also have your eyes that are bringing in inputs of energy. Sorry, it's a little bit crooked here, but you're doing the, sorry. So this is the, the whole head. Now you have your prism. Why, it's the third eye. Why? Because this prism that you're forming, because what your eyes really are transmit and receive of energy, inputs of energy that collect into the hemispheres of your brain, into the pineal gland. Now you form the 3D spectrum of reality that we exist in, truly. Okay? So within sacrifice, the point is, for within incantation, is that you have a sense of who you are and what you've always been your entire life. And mind control, soft kill, hard kill, whatever you want to call it, all involves the process of dismantling the psyche through a series of frequency, vibration, entrainment exercises that will output into the light, sense of light flicker. So this would be things that impact this would be light, flicker, rates. So for example, pulsing the person using certain hertz of lights, like the modern lights aren't like constant light bulbs, okay? Old school light bulbs, they patterned like this, like an analog wave. It's a little bit like the difference between a record and a CD. Modern lights are doing this. And I will quote the very brilliant Eric Dollard. He basically communicated it quite appropriately, that what they've done with the modern light system by converting it from a constant wave to a pulse system to conserve energy is anti-life. And so when you take something as basic as the way you get light into your 3D perception, and you don't truly understand that your brain does not see the light, your brain never receives light. So what is truly happening in this process? It's getting energy from the light bulb. It is receiving energy from the pulsed light bulb. So when you go from constant light to pulsed light, you are literally welcoming an anti-life signal into your perception based on what is the very foundation of the human wave. Can the human wave be reprogrammed into a digital format? I mean, I guess we're finding out, because that's what this end effect is having. It pulses people out of frequency because the brain, see, we're not robots, you guys. The brain is outputting something that is doing this. Sorry, hang on. Your brain waves are like that. Okay, brains don't go like this. They don't. But see, what's happening daily is you're being told increasingly that through the input of your light flicker into your input, which is affecting this 3D prism, the end result, if you ask me, is deconstruction of our physical reality, because it is just like the way that these trees are communicating, like waveform to waveform, using the Schumann resonance, an analog wave or an analog timing, I guess you could say, that provides more of an analog wave from thing to thing. All technology now is telling everybody, no, you know what we do? You know how we make more into something that, is this?
we just like, we cut a whole bunch of these pieces out that we don't really need, and then you create something that's like that. It compresses, like something that before, like this, can now be compressed into something that's like, like that wide. Sorry. So the analog wave that's like this, 3 whatever, they've learned to compress that into this. And then that takes away the analog wave, which can be replaced with more information, placed closer together by just dicing up it. You know how you have this and this? It says, no, we don't need these. We don't need that. We don't need the analog part of it. We can cut all that off for efficiency's sake, place them all closer together, and it won't be decipherable by the human brain, right? And so the same concept goes on with the light bulb and all these different concepts with light. And I think there's good reason for a lot of people to like kind of resist a lot of these energy concepts because, again, they all look on the surface like their intention is to conserve energy and to preserve our grid and to keep us from using all these harmful things. But if you know just how anti-life some of the people are that are thinking this up and what they're tricking everybody into getting into buy into and never telling you that your brain works this way, or if they do, it's not to help you, it's to steer you off course. So what I'm trying to explain to you here is this process of energy and why it creates that 3D prism, why they call your pineal gland the third eye, is because think about it. This looks a lot like the oval shape of your eyes. And so what you wind up doing by combining this is you have the 3D image, our holographic reality. Now, what I think is being sought to be done with the conversion from analog light to digital light is a change in our 3D perception of reality, a change in the way that it can be manipulated nearly in real time and turn everything into nearly a living video game out of our actual reality. It's hard to argue, folks, that things haven't gotten intensely weird and there must be a reason for it. And it's globally weird. It's not like it's only happening in the US. I mean, things are effed everywhere. And is that good for anyone? I mean, that's only good for a really small number of people. So, people are going to kind of have to get hip to some of these things. So within the concept of sacrifice, okay, the point is for when it's soft is to use light flicker rates. And then you've got things that are more like electromagnetic pulse. Again, what these all wind up doing is having varying degrees of effect on your brain's and body's ability to process energy and how energy is converted into light and how that light actually becomes the 3D spectrum of your reality that you exist in, and why it's increasingly important for them to use these mechanisms of electromagnetic pulse, light flicker, and varying other things that challenge your brain's organic process and surrounds it with something completely inorganic. Your brain really does it's going to fight it constantly and say, no, this is what I'm supposed to do. And all of the processes that before the supported analog, which was the regular light bulb, remember the good old ones back in that day that glue normal and didn't have that weird coil in them, that you can't hardly find anywhere? That's analog. That's a regular light. A candle. That's analog light. Oh, that looks like a cell phone. Never mind. In fact, that looks like an analog cell phone, like an old school one, doesn't it? Or it did. Gone. Anyways. Ow, my knee. Shoot. Oh, sorry. I'm having like a really bad whatever in my knee. Man. Okay.
So all of these things will challenge the brain's process of coping with reality or understanding information at a linear level, because this very process is being interrupted with something inorganic involving the brain's input of light and these newfound frequencies that involve electromagnetic pulse. And then this is where you can make an argument for rogue technologies that are out there that are just doing things to harm people through wall electricity. There's all kinds of ways you can just manipulate a person's wall electricity, their car environment. It's just a vibing technique. You just vibrate the person aggressively out off tune and out of frequency. It makes it very challenging to think or do anything. And these are sort of the soft kill methods of frequency entrainment to destabilize a person's perception of reality and their DNA. Sorry, I guess, they probably wouldn't be smiling at that point, so we'll just give them more of a static look like that. Although you never know with some of this technology. All right, so within sacrifice, sorry, I didn't mean to get too deep into technology-based things, but it's relevant to the discussion. So the point is, like, rituals are designed for, as the body, so as the heart, I guess you could say, opens up, the point of all the ritual practitioners, the point of like the circle, I guess, the ritual is for, these are just all the people that are surrounding them, right? It's to, at a frequency level, through incantations, chants, songs. If it's a church, hell, hymns. I mean, good and bad, whatever it is, when they're programming DNA, whether it's to influence you spiritually or to deconstruct you at a DNA level, these chants, these songs, the hymns, the incantations that are used within the rituals at the geographic location relative to the soil, and they'll especially choose locations on hilltops that have high concentrations of crystal quartz energy where a large amount of synchronicities take place. That's where they really want to spill the blood. And so these people, the point would be for them, I'm talking about the science of sacrifice here, guys. I'm not trying to be salacious with anything here. That the point of them performing this ritual and having all of the chants and incantations isn't just to be goofy mystics. These are things that they've been doing for, in some cases, if they're not new, they've been using these incantations for a very long time in repetition, which is to say that these bodies, these actual human beings, really just became, I guess you could say, they became the chambers of energy from all the participants of the ritual who are using the momentum of all the other times in history where these same chants, songs, hymns, whatever, whether it's good or bad, whether it's in church or whether it's in a sacrifice culture, it matters not when it comes to this method. It works. The more a person hears the incantation, especially at the moment of intense trauma or intense love, in either case, whether you're influenced spiritually or you're rejected or you feel or you're being murdered or killed or whatever the case might be, the point of what they're doing at this point is to program every bit of that DNA that they can through the act of terror before the blood is spilled and emptied into the location. And the last thing that the victim sees and is aware of is that these are the people that are responsible and that no one's going to do shit about it. And in that ritual and at that moment of the trauma, the whole point of this is, the whole reason they do this is so that these people can take the influence of the ritual as it's been performed through history and all the other people that did it as a vibratory frequency which stays anchored in the soil. Because once these materials program into those iron oxide layers, it's a little bit just like having a hard drive buried away that can be accessed through the crystal quartz layer for a later date. Hence why they do cornerstones in buildings, like the foundation of a building, right? And so, in one thing they'll do like some kind of capsule, and this is the anchor with blood that operates on those principles. And so the point is, for all the participants, which would, typically include people that will own the building or benefit from the construction of the building, will take part in the sacrifice. And like in the case that we showed you in the article earlier, that was from Black Child Productions, by the way, who created that article, a very brilliant creator that I don't know where they are or if they're still producing content. But if anybody does know if they are, I would love to get a link to their channel wherever it is. All I can ever find are re-uploads because they always have their material pulled offline. But the point is, through this, for within the soil, similarly here, there's like the earth layer, for it to spill down and be programmed with the influence of all the people that, again, their names are part of the incantations, their family names are all being programmed while this person's in a state of trauma, which is a DOR event. And the energy is spilled, so that the DOR is the aether above, and then the below is the blood sacrifice that binds to the aether, which is the incantation and everything that's said. And that's why they practice it. And it works scientifically for these reasons. They do it because they've learned time and time again that when they do these things, it works. So, again, folks, I would make an argument that, yeah, I mean, does it work? Sure. Obviously, these things are it works. Otherwise, they wouldn't have practiced these things, I guess you could say, for years and years. These wouldn't be like these wouldn't be traditions that have been practiced by like Mayans, Aztecs, traditions that go back. I mean, pretty much every continent worldwide has some tradition of ritual sacrifice and something that involves the integration of sacrifice within architecture. And so the notion or the idea that somebody or anybody in the world would find it absurd that if you happened upon information that may potentially lead to where some of those economies could potentially be going on, and they seem to be doing nearly everything cryptographically and encoded to communicate all of said services were part of it. Again, it doesn't mean that, it would take very few people to understand what's going on to do this. It'd probably be only like one or two people or a few people who would actually understand it at that level. And everybody else would just be sort of like patsies or whatever to do all the work leading up to the event. And they always do it that way. So I don't want people to think that just because I'm bringing this up, like I hope any of you, like if just because you're involved with one of these industries, you might know somebody. It doesn't mean that I'm going to make that as a direct correlation. Although, I mean, I would say like, yeah, like if there's a whole ton of things that lined up simultaneously, there would at least be a justification to have like an intelligent conversation about it, right? Without assumption of anything. That would be a kind of a logical thing to do. That's all. And I just say that, guys, because I have done I've done quite a bit of material, okay, for I've been doing material that talks about these topics, and I try to do it in a way that's intelligent, that discusses it more like, science. Like, why do people do this? Why would it work? What would be the reason? Because whenever somebody would bring up salacious material like this to me about ritual sacrifice, I would kind of go like, but like I understand why that's a movie plot line or why that would work effectively in a great horror film. But like, why would somebody have an interest in doing that in the real world? And then once you begin to study energetics and bioenergetics, and again, you gain a deeper understanding of what our physical reality is, then you get that DNA really is everything. And you must know by now that what I just told you really does relate to that. Like all of your cybernetic grids are really truly formed through these DNA coils, and that interaction between what goes on between the timing of your heart as your individual Like that's kind of like a representation of like your trinity of what your free will is relative to the overall Earth grid, because we're all kind of a part of it, and we're all making it into what it is simultaneously. And this is why I don't really like, it's not like I have it both ways, guys, when I tell you that I'm compelled to listen to, well, look, I'm not a person that believes in like flat earth, but I don't necessarily think that the round earth model is in fact, quote, reality. I think it's that we bend plasma through a similar curvature and experience between the input of energy into our eyes relative to the pineal gland, how that forms a 3D prism, how that forms through the hemispheres of our brain, through all the varying degrees of intention and motivation that drive us through the loins, to the heart, to the head. All of these things form what drive us and motivate us as individual will, and then what we share into what becomes the collective perception, which is, I would argue, the actual earth that we live on. We are every bit as much it already, when this is why I think there is a lot of good things in the Bible. Like whatever I believe it is or isn't, I don't know entirely, but like the whole concept of Adam's rib and all these other aspects of it, it's really kind of like, it's like a more metaphoric way of explaining what I'm discussing here, if you really think about it. Just like the Holy Trinity is a different way of communicating with metaphors that I think people can learn through, to understanding the energetic connection to it. So I would just hope that there's a pathway for people to get into those learnings involving energetics, because I think it would help people understand their faith, their spirituality in a deeper level, and they may actually have a deeper appreciation for it, not a lesser one. So I would say I wouldn't consider understanding energetics like something that is sort of like anti-God. But I can see how it gets scary sometimes, and how people would want to like kind of like go like, man, I didn't need to learn all that. Touche. I understand it. Why people would think that, but um, guys, it's just that, I think that the problem is like, I guess when you get exposed to some of this information, you start to realize that people might find some bargains that they think that they're okay with, to make these sort of like sacrifice rituals a reality. And that sacrifice doesn't always take on the appearance like the traditional thing of that ritual I just showed you. It could be just taking a person while they're still alive or have a life in them, and do things to them at a frequency level to vibrate that at a tune. If they can do it to a person, they can do it in other ways. And so what are the protections against these things, folks? Because there has to be some protections. And it's just getting too real for me anymore. Like that how important it is to that we need to get down to where what I'm talking about, like really understand at a deeper level and take what I'm telling you seriously, like why these things happen, why they've happened in history, and why you may think that overall we've evolved beyond all that, and that these things aren't practiced any longer. It's really not that. It's that you've got guys like John Griffith that go, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen. While he openly flies out a mother and two, a girl that was like 9, another one that's like 12 or something like that, or 13 years old, and has them do unspeakable acts of abuse and witness unspeakable acts. Ones that even put the mother in the hospital while this pervert producer watched the daughter. Guys, this story is, we've already gone dark on all these other things. So, I mean, do you understand that that's CNN? That is your CNN, everybody's CNN. That still, when you go up into airports everywhere, my guess is they're going to be playing CNN to this day. It doesn't change anything. It's like you can learn thing after thing after thing about these networks, and nothing seems to damage their placement in our perceptions. Nothing ever takes them off the totem pole. And why is that? Why is their influence like seemingly unstoppable? Why does nobody even think to remove them from power, even if just in their own minds? Well, because of that. And what's done with it, really. That's how CNN gained its power. a manipulation of sexual energy and trauma, and a deep understanding of frequency manipulation relative to human DNA, which is also understood by the national labs and the nuclear industry. Hint. And so the soft sacrifice at this point, the way they're doing it now, is through frequency entrainment and vibration, magnetic resonance. The same way you can push around, pieces of metal, coins or whatever with magnets. Very similarly, that can be done with the human body. And it doesn't go blam blam. It doesn't leave behind any trace. There's no sort of ballistics expert that can get involved and track down this gun. There's no bullet left behind. There's no shell casing. It just slowly vibrates something living into something dead. And the perpetrators, largely from energy industries, just stare at everybody and go like, I don't need this. Can that happen? Really? Jeez, I've never even heard of that. You have to also understand that within these mechanisms of soft kill, the point of them doing it to their victims is to program that victim's DNA, the water content, the blood, all of it at a vibratory level with the influence of the person so that they gain from the death of the person who is slowly losing their life force in front of them. And it's psychotronic generators. It's a technology-based thing that simply takes the body and just kind of takes it like that light bulb. Boom, 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 boom. So your body wants to like create that analog waveform, and it just keeps coming into you and going like, no. It's extremely easy to do to a person. I know, because it's happened to me. I don't know how to do it to somebody else. Never learned that method. I'm not sure I would have the equipment, and I definitely wouldn't have the want to do it to people. I can kind of guess on some of the methods that are used, just based on my wireless industry experience, but it's not like we were ever trained to do that to people. We were trained to make signals work for communication. But once you understand, like, when you point a dish at somebody, you could just aim it off on, and what effect that would have on the person's body. Yeah, it's invisible. The person can't see it, but it's a high power energy beam. If you aim it at the person's body, it's going to slowly cook them. Why does it work? Because, it's sending energy, even if it was like an analog waveform and it wasn't like pulse modulated. In either case, it would be an external form of energy that is far beyond what the human body is naturally accustomed to, which would cause it to go through its plasma cycle, which would basically turn into the person kind of getting cooked alive. I mean, there's been actual reports of people that stood in front of a microwave communication dish, or fell asleep in front of one, I should say, like while on a rooftop, like a security guard. I think in Seattle this happened to, maybe. I can't remember if this was a story, but it's like he sat in front of the microwave dish and cooked himself, and that's, you got to really think about that example as something real here, folks, as far as what we're discussing here. I mean, this is really how it works. So, all right, guys. Well, I've kind of spoken on the science of this one in pretty good detail, I think, tonight. I don't want to make this like go on forever, so I'm going to end it here, I think. There's in the description below, you'll find my details. If you feel like contributing to the channel, I would greatly appreciate that. It'd be a great time to do that. And yeah, I really do appreciate you folks joining. I would encourage you to watch the last two presentations to better contextualize this one if you haven't, over the last couple of nights. And yeah, I'll do another one soon, probably. I got to really get some work shifts done and things like that in the next few days or whatever. So I don't know when it'll be, but hopefully soon. And have a good night. And yeah, happy holidays.